Good evening and welcome to the School Board Facilities Workshop tonight. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Six of us are here tonight. The school board has been meeting as a group in a separate facilities workshop to discuss our facilities and our plans for the future. This is our third meeting of the this is our third facilities workshop. Tonight we are going to get a brief overview of our Esser funds and how we can use those to make repairs in the schools. Esser funds, to remind the public, are funds that come from the government and are not funded by us. They are related to COVID. We will then take a look at roof repairs, and then we will hear two presentations. One from the administration on their proposal for facilities, and one from Lavalley with updated financials. And then after that, we will discuss. So we will begin with Jane and a quick Esser update.
Thank you, Erica. To give a quick update, we met with Jim Lucy from Honeywell, and he is our rep from Honeywell that we worked through our performance contract with when we did the HVAC upgrades quite a few years ago. And it was both myself, Austin, Jeremy, Joe, met with them to talk about what they would see our plan as for HVAC upgrades. Jeremy had met with Jim prior to that, talking about looking at the Lavalley Brenzinger report, looking at items that had been up for consideration when we did the performance contract that had not been done at that time because those things didn't need to be replaced at that time. And he did come up with a list, which again is both lists combined, and we decided at the meeting that we would have them, Jim Lucy will come and do a presentation to the board at the next board meeting, and we'll bring the list of the items that we're looking to replace. I did speak with the state regarding the Esser funds, because typically with all federal funds, and particularly for that large amount, you would normally have to go out to bid. However, if you have a extenuating circumstance or an item that is a sole source, Honeywell could be considered a sole source because they did all of the other HVAC renovations, and to be consistent with their software and their programs, you could go with Honeywell as the sole source to do the contract work for replacements of HVAC projects. They would obviously go out to bid for each of the items because Honeywell doesn't do the work themselves, but they would be the project manager, they would oversee everything, they would guarantee everything, and they would be working directly with Jeremy. Is there anything that you want to add to that? No.
Thank you very much, Jane. Does anyone have any questions for Jane about that? If not, we appreciate the update, and we look forward to hearing that at the next board meeting. Next on the agenda is the roof repairs. Jeremy?
So I gave everybody this handout from ARM Consulting, that the guys that came and met with us, or met you guys here a few months ago or a month ago. This is the list that they came up with. We had them simplify it on the report that they gave us. And if you look in the the second column, that says remedial maintenance, and then the third to last column says remaining life. It's important to understand that the remedial maintenance column is to maintain the remaining life column. So all in all, the remedial maintenance items, some of which need to be done before winter preferably, add up to about $150,000. Once that's complete, we can go to the remaining life expectancy column and see what we have left. First page, Barca is about 5 to 7 years. Derry Village, 1 to 3 years. That pretty much tells you the story there. East Derry is in fairly decent shape, 5 to 7 years. Excuse me. Gilbert H. Hood, 1 to 3 different sections. We just did a large section. We did a recovering there. Jeez. Also, the current estimated replacement cost, and that, has everything added up together if you were to replace everything on the building. So we would have to take the 1 to 3 year areas out and maybe do our own math there, but kind of gives you guys an idea of what we can get left from our building's roofs. I guess 1 to 3 years or 3 to 5 years goes by pretty fast, so. And in speaking with them, they're not a contractor, they're a consultant, but they're already taking or awarding projects for next summer. So it becomes a timing issue with whatever we decide to do on the buildings that need it the worst. Could we get it in next summer? Not if we wait till March to make up our minds. By the time it goes to vote for the budget or whatever, all these contractors are already spoken for that summer, so we're looking at 2024 by the time we make our decision. However you guys see that being streamlined, I don't know, but if we do the remedial maintenance on it, that gets us 1 to 3 years, great. We work with them to do annual inspections, I think we'll be in better shape. Keeping a professional eye on the situation will be helpful. So that's kind of where it stands, and I think Jane and I had talked, we're moving forward with the maintenance portion. Everything that they have on here that adds up to the 150, we're working with them on getting contractors there and making those repairs. I think there was 2 or 3 buildings that was pretty important that it gets done before winter. So, any questions?
I had one. What's the difference between the replacement cost and the estimated recover cost?
I should have mentioned that, sorry. So the replacement cost includes going right down to the decking. The estimated recover cost is salvaging what insulation is there and going over it. So if there's nothing wrong with the insulation, they said it's a major portion of the cost of the project is the insulation. The recovering cost would be much cheaper. It becomes an issue at, I think they said Derry Village and South Range, because it's got like a gypsum board for the decking, and I think, what did he say, it looks like Chex Mix, or that's the next layer where, buildings like the back of Grinnell has a metal decking, the insulation, than the rubber roof. So those 2 buildings are a little bit more difficult to work with. So rather than rip the whole roof off and put a new roof on, they can utilize some of what's there.
So Jeremy, I just want to make sure I get this right. So you're saying remedial maintenance buys us 1 to 3 years in some instances, or 5 to 7 in some instances?
Yep, the remaining life expectancy column as it sits now, that's if we do the remedial maintenance.
Perfect.
That's their opinion.
And then or do they even give what remaining life expectancy would be if we were to do a current estimated recover? Or sorry, just a recover?
A recover would give you whatever you buy for a roof, 30 year, whatever, 20 year. That would be a new roof, essentially.
And there's places that we cannot do recover, we will have to do replacements of those portions of the roof, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly which line items these are.
I'm assuming it's the ones that just say NA and that current estimated recover cost.
Right.
Yep.
Yep, you're correct.
When you say they're booking out to next summer, is that for the remedial maintenance, or is that for replacement?
No, the
or
maintenance
recovery?
can all be done as soon as we get a plan together.
And would that be done within our existing budget?
Budget lady?
Or I guess the question is, how would that be done? Because obviously it's needed.
Yes, so we would be taking it out of this current budget. And when we met with them last week, they were very concerned about getting through the winter without doing that remedial work. And I think we had all agreed that it was important to do that. And of course, I was there for the whole presentation, but I can't tell you exactly all of the areas that needed to be repaired. But he just said that there was a lot of areas that could be a lot of damage if getting through another winter. So yes, it will come out of this year's budget, and, we'll look to see where we're maybe not going to spend or have some overage, but we just think that the amount of damage that's been caused, and the concern that they have as a consultant, we felt it was important enough to move forward with that. Now, what they have done in the past that we spoke to them, you could, because we're just getting to that stage of the budget and warrant articles, you could, at some point, choose during the budget process, maybe you say, well, we would like to pick a roof, Grinnell. If you want to replace Grinnell, and that's going to be one of the things that you're going to either put on a warrant article, or you're going to have a warrant article that says we're going to save that money, you could do that. And he said he did have some roofers who would still bid on a project like that. He would go out to bid and then notify the winner of who would get the bid right after the March vote, and some of them would be willing to do that. But like Jeremy said, a lot of them already have their summer work already booked. So you're taking a chance on that you could get it done this summer. Either way, it might be recommended if you did a capital reserve account this year, and that way you would have the money for whenever you needed to start the project.
Okay, that makes sense. I just wanted to know where the money was coming for doing what we needed to do, because clearly it needs to be done.
And Jane, question, if we were to put something like this on a warrant article and it were not to be passed, how would we get those roofs repaired?
The larger roofs, if it's not going to pass in a warrant article, if the roof wouldn't pass in a warrant article, you could still have a warrant article that's getting saved aside to a capital reserve. If your roof becomes in such disrepair that it's not safe to operate a building, you have those retained funds that the board has been retaining, and those are for emergency items. So.
When does it become an emergency? Because I'm not going to lie. I mean, if hearing that if this doesn't get done before winter when we're in October already is pretty scary to me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you mean the $150,000 project?
No.
Oh, okay.
So I'm imagining that these roofs are in it seems like the news keeps getting worse. So yeah, 1 to 3 years, that's a big range.
Sure.
So I'd like to get these done as quickly as possible.
Sure, and we understand that. The ones for the $150,000, there isn't a rainy day that goes by that the maintenance department is not running around to schools because there's many leaks. And so it's just not the inconvenience of it, it's the damage, obviously, that's being caused. And so he reassured us that with those repairs, that would be a significant halt to some of these major leaks that we have. I know this school, we see them a lot, we get calls a lot. I don't know which the worst school is. Jeremy could, yes. So every time you see a new one of those, the SAU office in the finance department, it comes every time it's raining. The conference room at the SAU, each one of the schools is having that same issue.
I do believe they said Barker and Gilbert H. Some section of Barker and some section of Gilbert H. were the two that had to be done prior to the winter.
Yeah, and that's not all of the 150
Right.
number. That's a portion of it. So, of that remedial maintenance column, there was a couple of items that we wanted to nip in the bud before winter.
So you had said the number for remedial repairs was about 150. Is that just how much you're going to do? The total here is 186,605.51. Are you looking to do all of that amount?
I never added them up.
What?
I never added them up specifically.
Just wanted to specify, that's all.
Yeah,
It's added up on the last page. Just want to make sure I know the number.
yeah, I think in conversation it came up
Yeah.
about 150.
So I'm not sure that we're going to do the whole thing, but it will be in the range, and
Not before winter.
What?
Right. The whole thing.
oh, right, not the whole thing will be done before winter. There was about 150 of that list that they recommended, and Austin's correct. It was, those two schools were the ones that they were most concerned about. And again, they're a consultant. They're not pitching to, because they're going to do all these repairs. They actually have to go out to bid for it.
Does anyone else have any questions about the roofs and the roof report? If Jeremy or Jane, do you have anything to add about the roofs?
Nope, just ongoing.
Well, we appreciate you working with the consultant and giving us this very detailed list. It's very helpful for us, and we appreciate their work in helping us work through what we need to fix. So the next two items on our agenda are related. The first is a presentation by the administration on what they think would be the best course of action for our facilities, and that will be followed by a presentation by Lavalley about updated financials given some changes in the building aid application and things that we either weren't aware of or that have happened since then. And then the board will discuss a combination of those two things, and there will also be a chance for members of the public, if they'd like, to come up and speak for 3 minutes and give their input. So we will begin with the administration.
All right, the SAU leadership team was tasked by the school board to create a presentation for tonight, this facilities workshop. Purpose was to give our opinion of the best course of action, specifically from a student perspective first, followed by staff, families, the community of Derry as a whole. So this is that presentation. What are our priorities? All students receive a high-quality education in a safe, welcoming, and supportive school. Staff work in a professional, inclusive, and fun district. The district supports families while maintaining short and long-term fiscal responsibility to the community. And our school board works with community organizations, such as the town council, to collaboratively support the needs of all Derry residents. What are our current conditions? Not as specific as Lavalley Brenzinger or even Jeremy and the roof repairs, but we do have, we operate 9 buildings. There are 9 schools within 7 buildings, the SAU central office and the warehouse. Based on a recent Lavalley Brenzinger facility study, all Derry Cooperative School District buildings need repair. Some need significant repairs, and both Derry Village School and South Range School need the most substantial improvements. While enrollment has decreased for 10 years, demographic studies do not predict substantial enrollment changes over the next 10 years. The Derry Cooperative School District has submitted an application for building aid from the state of New Hampshire. The next opportunity to submit a building aid application to the state of New Hampshire is July of 2024. What are some future considerations? As you just heard, without a substantial financial investment, luckily for this year, that we are not considering that $150,000 as substantial, but when you look at all of the repairs for the roofs, the replacements, the upgrades, and so forth, the Derry Cooperative School District cannot continue to operate some of the current buildings beyond 5 years. The regular maintenance costs of operating the existing buildings will continue to increase as a result of deferred maintenance. The consolidations of schools will create cost savings in both staffing and facilities. Community members have been exploring a facility solution to house community services from preschool to senior citizens, with programs to free up downtown commercial space for increased tax revenue. And we, the SAU leadership administrative team, believe the school board should continue to discuss potential options with the town. So brass tacks, what is the best course of action? This is our plan A. Continue the state building aid process while submitting waivers for the full square footage of the project. Increase the outdated 120 square foot per student that the state still goes by and has received waivers for before, and so that we can include the square footage in the 2000-2001 renovations to Derry Village School and South Range School. Place a warrant article before the voters in March 2023 for a bond to build a new school in the back area of the current Derry Village Elementary School. Place a warrant article before the voters in March 2023 to establish a capital improvement account funded by unspent money from the 2022-2023 school year, which would provide money for necessary repairs to existing buildings. So what is also involved with Plan A? Sell the SAU building, the central office at 18 South Main Street, move the SAU staff to an existing school. We are leaving that not specific at this time because we would want to look further depending on how things play out as to where and what school. Move the Derry Early Education Program to an existing elementary school. There's been a lot of discussion about this. We do believe that it's a fantastic space over at Gilbert H. Hood Middle School, but some people do believe that it would be nice for the Derry Early Education Program to be in an elementary school, since they are mainly 3- and 4-year-olds. Convert West Runningbrook to a 5th and 6th grade middle school. Convert Gilbert H. Hood to a 7th and 8th grade middle school. Now, this came up prior to Lavalley Brenzinger, when the district itself spent a number of years going through a facilities study and examination. And as we have seen, the most available space is at the middle schools. Their numbers have dropped dramatically over these number of years. And I put a note in here, both middle schools would then have 3 teams at each grade level. They would be able to retain their same master schedule. They would continue to have the same number of teachers. There would only be a duplication of 2 special ed programs. And all 4 grade levels would then participate in interscholastic sports. So 5th graders would now be, the thought process would be that we would put in, well, I don't know if you want to call it A or B, but like an upper team at the 7-8 school and a B team at the 5-6 school. Redistrict all elementary schools. Remove the old Derry Village Elementary School and create, once the new school opens, and create athletic fields where the old Derry Village is right now, and then put the South Range Elementary School building and or land up for sale once the new school is occupied. So what if the new school warrant article does not pass in March? I'll pause just for a second to get the slide up. You're going to hear some repetition here, especially through pretty much the majority of this slide. Sell the SAU, move the SAU staff to an existing school, move deep the Derry Early Education program to an existing elementary school, convert West Runnybrook 5th and 6th grade middle, Gilbert H 7th and 8th grade middle. I won't read again about more space at the middle school and what the note is. Redistrict all elementary students, and then once again sell South Range Elementary School building and or land to keep our options open with the Derry Village Elementary School site. So what is also involved with Plan B? Place a warrant article before voters in March 2024 to establish a capital improvement account funded by unspent money from the 23-24 school year, which would provide money for necessary repairs to existing buildings. Submit another application for state building aid by July 1st of 2024 for a new school at the site of the current Derry Village School. Now, I did indicate that what is involved with Plan B, and that is if the new school warrant article does not pass. I guess we could not pass the warrant article and get state aid, but I don't know if that works that way. So maybe if the warrant article doesn't pass, we're assuming that we no longer are, right, we are no longer up for state aid. So that's why we would say we would submit another application in July of 2024 for state aid for a new school. And then once again, place a warrant article before the voters in March of 25 to get a bond to build a new school in the back area of the current Derry Village Elementary School. And once again, in March of 2025, you'll see the redundancy here. We believe that we should continue on a yearly basis to establish a capital improvement account that is funded by unspent money from that particular school year moving forward year to year to year, so that we would have monies for necessary repairs to our existing buildings. Do you want to do questions now, or do you want to?
So what is the board's preference? Would you like to ask questions of the administration now, or wait to hear the Lavalley report and ask questions of both? Does anyone?
I think I have some questions about this presentation, but I may have questions about this presentation later as well. But I think just to clear up things.
One short deal, that's it.
Yeah.
Why don't we have a short period of questions about this presentation, then we'll have the Lavalley presentation, and then if there's still more questions, we can go back and ask those as well.
All right, so since I brought it up, I guess I'll start. So I just want to clarify the 5th, 6th/7th, 8th model was brought up during the initial facilities trifecta, and it was not popular, mainly by the administration. So I'm curious as to where that changed, and the logistics at that time also seemed difficult with extra busing, and we're having trouble finding bus drivers and everything else. But that was my first question. The second question was Plan B. We're saying sell SRS, which means we're closing SRS. So are we redistricting into 4 elementary schools then?
So for the first question, we're at a new era. We have a new leadership team. Some of the people on this team weren't involved whatsoever before. Other people were involved maybe minimally. Others were involved to a great extent. We've seen firsthand the drop, as I've said numerous times. When I first came here in 2004, we had 950 students at Gilbert H. Hood. We now have somewhere in the low 500s at both of the schools. And we expected to see this from the enrollment studies that were done and so forth, Davis demographics and all the rest of that. And sure enough, it has happened. And when we look at, Joe is very good with, he was my scheduling guru way back when. He's very good with the numbers and so forth, as of course you all know Jane is. And when they looked at the enrollments and so forth, we believe that you could keep K through 5 schools, but it would be difficult if you were looking to remove a school. The numbers would be a lot closer. When you move 5th grade into the middle school, and I know there was conversations about 5th graders with, well, at the time, I think we might have been looking at 5 through 8 was one of the situations. But, when we look at something like there was a number of things we discussed. One of the things that came up was 5th grade has science, for instance, New Hampshire SAS science. 5th graders would now have a full year in a middle school schedule of having science. So I would like to think that they would, over time, perform better on the New Hampshire SAS because they would have a full 45 minutes every day of school of science, as well as the other subjects as well would get to have the 2 unified arts like their older colleagues and so forth have. And when we look, we know where these are tough decisions, and it was a long week or so and weekend and so forth. And I think you got to weigh things. When it comes to transportation, we know that it's hard to find drivers. There's no doubt about that. But we don't think we can make a determination of what we're going to do with the schools on just one of those situations. And, maybe we know that the bus. Yeah, go ahead.
May I speak to the transportation? We already have a full complement of buses to West and a full complement of buses to Gilbert Hood. I mean, we would absorb those people into those full complements, and it really wouldn't change, other than the routes would be a little bit longer because they're going through the whole town instead of only half the town. But we still have a full complement to both sides.
Did I answer?
No, that was good. I think
else?
I appreciate the rethinking it and improving upon the academics. I think was always been, at first when it was brought up, it was more of a let's wedge this into what works, and where you've brought up academics and how that can improve that makes sense as to why we'd want to do it then. So.
Other board members have questions for this presentation before we look at the Lavalley one and then consider them in tandem? Oh, David?
So Austin, on Plan B, when we talked Plan A, several months ago, the beginning of, after the elections, South Range was compared to Grinnell when we were looking to close a school, right? And Derry Village, between the three. On Plan B, I know Derry Village is on the bottom end of the report, being more issues. Did you guys consider looking at South Range compared to Derry Village in Plan B, rather than just sticking with South Range like we did in Plan A? And if you did, what are some of the reasons that you came up with?
The main reason that we went in Plan B was because it was a school board vote already. We need maybe a little bit more input from Lavalley Brenzinger, just where, if we were to compare Derry Village and South Range, are they pretty much the same entity, or is one a little bit worse than the other, or one's a little bit better than the other? I think one of the things that we were looking at was because that space, in other words, it doesn't get, the warrant doesn't pass. We're not saying that the warrant's going to pass first time. Not everything does. We're hoping that we could continue to push that forward, put up another warrant article, and apply for school aid again. So the thought process was leaving that space available to house a potential new building down the road would be the thought process. So I don't know if you're saying, well, we could still close Derry Village and leave it there and mothball it, maybe, but, I think the thought process would be to leave that as a potential, because if it doesn't pass the first time, maybe we do some more work and maybe it passes the second time. I believe there's been building warrants that haven't passed the first time and have passed on a.
School building projects, yes, that's
So
right.
it was really more around keeping that option open for that space.
I think the other one is
And
the
Derry
size.
Village is a little bigger.
So
That's
if
a
we
good
were gonna,
point. Yeah.
if we were gonna condense, or recreate the middle schools into 5, 6, 7, 8, that would free up space in the elementary schools, which we could bring deep to Derry Village with that extra wing they have. Which then if we did in the future build a new school behind there, they would already be on site. There wouldn't be much of a transition for that part of the curriculum.
Does anyone else have any questions for administration before the Lavalley report?
I just had one question, that as far as the configuration of the two middle schools are concerned, would the way that they're both described here with basically an upper and a lower middle school, would that give us more room for expansion within the two schools as opposed to having two schools that are 5, 6, 7, 8?
What we found with the 5, 6, 7, 8, and it's nothing against this school. This is a great school, but the configuration of this school, you have a lot more flexibility when you have hallways with classrooms, which is an older model, like a good portion of Gilbert H. Hood is. And we do believe that Gilbert H. Hood could handle a 5 through 8. But when you look at West Runningbrook and you've got 6 pods, it would be ideal if they had 8 pods, because then you'd have a grade level in 2 of the pods each. What's the best way to say it? The room configuration just really, we started moving pods where, okay, the 5th grade would use this classroom in the next pod because the back doors, and then in the 6th grade would work, and then 7th grade had 2 of the 8th grades, and then 8th grade went into the art room. And then the other problem with the 5 through 8, because of the different grade levels, it increased the need for more unified arts teachers, and therefore either more space or some of those teachers going back to the old days of traveling around with a cart and so forth. So when we got off of that and looked harder at the 5, 6 and the 7, 8, and we at first talked to the principal here, Mitch Edwards, and he was having a major headache with the 5, 8 idea and what would be happening and how the schedule will look and how they'd fit him in and all the different lunches and all. And as soon as we told him we were going with the 5, 6, where he'd have 3 and 3, we'd have the same master schedule, same amount of teachers, same classrooms, it just worked out. And now you have 5th and 6th graders together, and you have 7th and 8th graders together. And so.
Yeah, it sounds like if it doesn't give you more latitude and wiggle room, at least it doesn't cause a major amount of aggravation, which
True.
You aptly described.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Austin, so my questions kind of dovetail off of David's. So looking at Plan B, does this Plan B give us the ability to afford to start doing some of these major repairs that we have to do to the buildings? And I guess part 2 is, would there be any other plans that you think would afford us the ability to do the repairs in the schools that are needed?
So I think all of us, while we discuss these situations, when we look at the repairs that are necessary, I'm coming to the realization that we will need to look at this a little bit more. When you talk about 24 to 30 million to repair South Range, you're talking about bringing it up like new, flexible spacing, making it a lot like the visioning project that we did looking at the new school. So I think we have to get some more information from Lavalley Brensinger about what it will cost to. We have a pretty good idea now of what it will cost to fix the roof. What will it cost to fix the facade and the air and give them some more electricity? And as Jay said to me the other day, we're not going to raise the ceilings. And I said, well, good, then we'll save money on heat because they'll have lower ceilings. So I do think we have to have more conversations, and we have to. This administrative team couldn't stress more that we have to have the school board to really look at talking with the town council about are there some options for what they're looking to do with their facility and so forth, and seeing where this goes. I don't think anybody at this point wanted to shake up the school aid package that we have and what we've put in, and tell them we're going to start looking at different schools or do this or do that. I think we need to play this out and see where it goes, but depending on where we rank, depending on what the voters say, and depending on again, I don't understand the how it works. It would be interesting whether the voters said yes or no. It'd be interesting to see how much we would have got if they say it, even though they said no. And I don't know if we're automatically out of the running. And if somebody here knows that better than I, or we can at least look into it, because if we knew that we were going to get such and such, and it was a good amount, it might help the next time when we put this to a vote, with the idea that we're going to put, and we understand that 2 years later, now you're up against different districts and different schools and all the rest of that. Do you have some input, Jay? No, that would be helpful. Can't you see me drowning here?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, I'll speak up to. There we go. So just don't mean to jump in, but just your question about, so if you don't pass or you don't go for the next bond, so you have two bites of the apple, as they say. So if you don't pass the bond this first time, wherever we rank, you still have another chance the next year before the cycle begins again. So there's 2 years you have a chance of this. So 2023 and 2024, and then we do a new application in 2024 for 2025, 2026. So it's a 2 year. So if you don't pass the first time, you do have another chance the following year.
So, wow, what a difference. So, correct me, please, if I'm getting this wrong. So the thought process, if it does not pass the bond does not pass in March, we still have March of 24 to put the bond back on a warrant, with the understanding that we have maintained our rank, and the voters could then vote again, knowing where we rank, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They won't know how much money we're getting. They'll just know where we rank.
Correct. There's a whole thing with the state funding, which is very interesting still. You will know where we rank. We'll know where we rank in January 15th, the middle of January. We won't know how much money we're getting, because whoever's above us depends on how much they take if they pass their bonds in this year or next year. And then there's obviously the waivers that we want to submit to try to get us the most money we possibly can get. So I'll definitely be talking about that in a few minutes. But so unfortunately, the state doesn't say this is how much you're getting unless you're number one on the list. And then obviously you have the full pot available.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions for the administration before Lavalley gives their side? Sure, Brenda.
So it looks like Plan A and Plan B are the same, with the exception of a new school, which is disappointing to me. 5, 6, 7, 8 was voted on by the board, and it was voted against. There was a lot of discussion with the the individual schools about that. And there was a lot of discussion about curriculum and adding curriculum or adding time to the fifth grade classes with what they were missing or what was perceived to be missing to proceed to sixth grade. I don't know what happened with that. Maybe COVID changed everything. I don't really know. So I'm not happy with this, honestly. And mainly because the board did vote against it. And there was a plan about curriculum for fifth graders. So this isn't something that I will support. I do have a question, though. Back on, let me see, what page is this? I don't know what page it is. It's the one that has what is the best course of action for Plan A. What does this mean where it says increase outdated 120 square foot student for new schools and then include square foot in the 2021 or 2001 renovations of Derry Village and South Range? What does that mean?
So I think Jane had indicated to me afterwards, and at that point we weren't prepared to talk to Jay, but that Jay might actually have a third idea for a waiver. But one of the things that the state, they will not, and again, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but they won't allow, we have around 140 something square feet per student. Some of the people who are competing against us, they're up in the 180s and possibly even 200 square feet. So when I say it's outdated, I'm talking about the state, just like their adequacy funding is outdated and so many other things that the state does is outdated. 120 square feet per student. Now, Jane is aware that there's been waivers put in for that, and schools that have got school aid have won that waiver, and the state allowed them, and as we've said, it's even higher than the square footage that we have. Then there's the 35-year rule that you were aware of because you said maybe we should put a waiver in because the state required us to renovate those buildings or do some additions. I don't quite remember if it was just renovations or additions or whatever.
We had to add specialized space.
Okay.
So we had art on a cart, we had music on a cart, we had computers all over the place. We had to add specialized space. That was mandated by the state. That's how those renovations those additions got put in. And also special education space.
Right, and we have, without anybody saying that would be accepted and so forth, got some semi-positive response to putting in a waiver for that. And I didn't know if you had a waiver for anything else, or was it just those two things?
There's just some clarification that needs to happen.
Okay, thank you.
There's the way the state does it, they divide the state up into different counties, and each county has a certain dollars per square foot they're allowed. The question is, what is included in that dollars per square foot? So we need to clarify what that number is or ask for a waiver so that we can meet the number that they're suggesting. So yes, there is kind of a third piece that goes to that.
Thank you.
I still don't understand this, though. The 120 square foot is a state?
The state says that they'll only, in other words, let's just say it's 140 to make it easy. So they will total up our the project minus 20 square foot per student. So if it's a 700, somebody help me with the math, but if it's a 700 student building, we would lose 20 square feet times 700. Because they'll only allow 120 and we want to have 140. So we put in a waiver to say this is the reasoning we believe that it should be 140, and if they accept that, then they'll take the whole square footage of the project.
Do you mind if I jump in? I'm sorry. Is it okay if I try to answer?
Yeah, because I'm feeling like we're trying to make the state change something here with something that's outdated, And that's probably not going to happen.
So there is precedence that they have changed that number. The last two schools that got state funding, that number was higher than the number that they had published. And the reason is, as you just pointed out, special ed. Special ed spaces take up a lot more space, especially when you have students that just need different IEP, different things. They need different space, they need different requirements. So that number from 120 has been increased in the past. So that waiver has been approved by the state in the past, and I think based on everything we're doing, we're on the same path. I would think we would also have that approved.
And I think if you look at the NECC program, which we all think is so fantastic and is not only keeping students in district in the least restrictive environment and so forth, but they have a total of 8 kids in a classroom. So when you, and a lot of times they need 2 classrooms because they need a space to divide up the kids and depending on what they're doing. So here you have 2 full classrooms, not always full classrooms, but even if it's 1 classroom with 8 children. So I believe that the state has probably accepted these waivers because they understand that with what we do with some of these programs, and it's not always just special ed either, depending on let's take PACE. We do PACE. A lot of times, especially at the elementary school level, depending on whether or not kids are at that level, there might be some smaller classes. And so, when they look at these and they say it's going to be 5th grade and it's going to be 30 kids per class, it's not always the way it needs to be, depending on programming and depending on class sizes and so forth.
So this is increasing the square footage that we use, and asking the state to allow it, not using their number. I was really confused by the state and outdated, and I think that's what threw me.
Go ahead, Jan. Thank you.
So Brenda, when I brought forward my report, the last report that I had done on the square footage and the calculation of school building aid, the 120 is the state requirement, and our proposed building actually is more than the 120 per student. And Salem, in fact, was one of the schools that Austin made mention that actually got the waiver. And when I talked to Amy Clark from the state, she agreed the 120, which is the state ruling, has not caught up to building requirements. So when you look at back when they had the 120 square foot rule, classrooms or programs such as NECC, they didn't have them, or just larger spaces in general. And so that's why Salem, and I forget the other town, I'm sure that Jay and Eric would know what the other town was, but they waived that 120 square foot. So instead of the state calculating how much you would qualify for school building aid, instead of qualifying for 120, they qualified for 160 or 180 square feet per student. So it just changes your eligibility for school building aid. Yeah. And hopefully
I was understanding it a completely different way. I don't know why, but
hopefully the state will catch up at some point. I'm not sure who changes those things, but they probably would need to catch up, because even when talking to both Jay and Eric and Austin and Amy Clark, there's no building projects that are building with 120 square foot as a space per student. So that was one of the waivers, and of course the 35-year rule. In talking with Austin and again expressing it to Amy Clark, I mentioned to Amy Clark, I think it was you that brought up at that board meeting, that we were forced to have to do those renovations and additions. And so, she agreed that that would be a compelling argument that you could use in requesting a waiver. Again, those are things we wouldn't know until after we've been ranked, and then you apply for all those waivers. And I think that all of those might be part of Jay and Eric's presentation, so hopefully that will clarify it too. Yeah. So none of the square footage changed on our end. We didn't change the building or anything.
So I just wanted to go back to a point that Brendan made because I think it's a good one. So up until this point, our Plan A had been a K through 5 elementary school on the new DVS site. Obviously, this is a little bit of a divergence where we're going from K through 5 now to being a K through 4 elementary schools, and then moving 5th and 6th grade and 7th and 8th grade to the middle schools. So I guess the question I would have, Austin, for you and the leadership team is, are you guys confident that the curriculum leaders and the teachers would be supportive of this, and would you be able to execute on this by the time we were to redistrict the schools?
Well, from a teacher standpoint, nobody's going to lose a job because we have people at the middle school level who are K6, who are K8. We have people, of course, at the elementary level that are the same way. It would be a situation, a combination of looking for volunteers as well as looking to ask specific people to move one way, or because it could move one way or the other depending on the situation and so forth. But when we look at fifth grade, just from a sports is important. We know that. People who are involve their children in interscholastic athletics love that. We would be able to start these kids a year sooner because we checked on that, and 5th grade, as long as they're in a middle school, is acceptable at the NHIAA level. When it comes to curriculum, we see a bonus with the whole science situation. I know, I don't know who brought it. I don't know if it was you, Brenda, or somebody else. We had looked before about increasing time for math and literacy and having an elementary model. We believe we're moving in the right direction with competency-based education, with what we're doing, with what our teachers are doing in the classrooms, and what we're doing to support the students. And we don't, I was at the middle school for so long, and I believe in it wholeheartedly in educating the whole child. And I know our state only cares about New Hampshire SAS and math and literacy and a little bit of science. And we care about the whole child. We care about everything they're involved in. We care about all the experiences they have, and we believe there are a lot of K through 8s. There are a lot of 5 through 8s. There's 5, 6s, and 7 and 8s. We think that 5th graders being up with 6th graders in their own building will be a benefit to them in the long run.
Would a K through 4 model in a new school scale down the project size?
Something that we would need to look at numbers, and I look at Jane and Joe again. But if you think of moving, the thought process of moving deep out of the new building is it could go into the new building, but as we know, those 5 classrooms don't count towards the building aid with them in that building. And we've even talked about something like Ernest P. Barker. It's our largest elementary school right now by far, and DEEP is a program that pretty much runs itself. It has its own coordinator, it has its own space, and even though they occupy Gilbert H. Hood, they run their, under Janine Metro as the coordinator. When I look at the Ernest P. Barker, their administration and their teachers are going to be dealing with a school that, even though it's 525 kids, it's 400 and something K through 4 kids. So the bigger school becomes a little bit of a smaller school. There is the option to keep it in the new building. There's also the option of, since we're going to have more K through 4s in less buildings, that the configuration stays the same. I don't know if we can lop off the third floor, and I don't know if we would look to do something like that at this stage, but we'd have to look at the numbers. Right now, we know the numbers would work with the space that we have there, and the thought process would be, because there are people out in the community that are concerned about the type of things that are going in with the old Circle of Friends, and across the street where Mr. Butterfield has his place, and up over at the the old was it a junkyard or something on, right? Those kind of things, that keeping those 5 classrooms and keeping the new building as it is will provide some ability that if there is some influx, we'll have some space to handle that better than if we started, take those 5 classrooms off or take off the third floor or something. Now, that being said, if it comes down to saving money, then who knows? That's stuff that needs to be discussed, I believe.
And just to, as a reminder, we did have Davis Demographics that did a demographic study. And they met with the town and talked about any potential projects. Those were all included in their calculations. And as an example, in the year, they did a 10-year out. So in 2031, Gilbert H. Hood's projection for enrollment is 507, and West Runningbrook's projection is 506. And that's for years 2031. And if I just look when they first did the demographic study, the enrollment for 2021 for the elementary school was 1,940 students for all the elementaries. Their projection going out to 31 is 1991. So 50 more students over the course of time to 2031. And as you can see, Gilbert H. Hood and West Runningbrook are still, the enrollment still continues to either stay or go down. And actually in their projections, the middle school dips quite a bit in years 2024, not quite a bit, but in 2024, they dip and then they just start to go up by 6 or 7 students in 2029, 2030. So just to give you an idea, but that presentation I believe is posted online too if anybody's curious about what the projections were. But all of those projections, when Lauren Woods does this report, he meets with George Sioris, he meets with the planners, he asks them for any plots of land that have pulled any potential permits, no matter how far out they are, and all of those were included in that plan.
Does anyone else have any questions for the administration before Lavalley presents the updated financials for the project?
I do.
Okay.
Sorry. So just one last question. So I know there's a lot of potential changes in both Plan A and Plan B from where we are today to where we would be going. I think there's a lot of concern of these big changes and what does that mean for the district. Kind of looking at the flip side of things, can you guys speak to the cost of either things being status quo as far as having to do these large potential repairs on an annual basis, as well as speaking to what effect that would have on the budget, as well as what would happen if we were not able to complete these repairs?
I got most of that, Jonathan. Could you repeat that on the large repairs?
Yeah, just kind of what type of impact that would have on our budget, because if we're not able to do or get a bond passed, and we spend $150,000 now, and then we take $1.5 million out of an unreserved fund at the end of this year, and then we still don't have a major or a capital improvement plan in place. What does that, I mean, there's a cost of doing nothing or a cost of keeping things status quo. What does that look like?
So first and foremost, I hope that the town is willing to consider, if nothing else, a capital improvement plan, because it's long overdue. And We all do it in our own homes. We put a little bit of money aside because we know the oil burn is going to go at some point or whatever, so we don't get caught short. So the hope is that the town will see the benefit and vote what you folks ask for, if you do ask for that warrant, so that we can start having that capital reserve to move forward. We have to, one of the slides talked about sustaining these schools. They do need work. Now, I do think we need to have more conversations with Lavalley Brenzinger about, okay, if it's going to take 24 to 30 million to bring South Range up to like new, what's it going to take to bring South Range so it's functional? We fix the roof, we fix the facade, we fix the air, we put some more electricity in. As Jay joked with me, we're not going to raise the ceilings, but get some, because I've learned that when we did that visioning exercise and when we looked at these buildings, we looked at bringing them up to having flexible spaces and having more room and being somewhat like the new building. Well, we might not be able to afford that, but we might be. We're going to have to do repairs. We're all, I think, very well aware of that. And, I think you folks on the school board have taken some hits, and I want to stick up for you because we've had to make cuts, and I know people on the board have talked about this. There's been some difficult cuts over these years and years and years, and sometimes it's a little bit easier when you're talking about, do you cut a teacher or do you cut, putting a driveway in or some of these things. And those were some difficult decisions that were made with a lot of thought. But we are at a point now, like Jane and Jeremy said, we've got to spend that 150 to get those roofs just to the point where they're going to last those 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7s. But we need to start looking at this down the road and look, okay, there's some roofs that are 22, 26. We don't have to worry about them right now, but we got to start looking at the sections of these buildings and start assuming we have to fix some of them every year as we move along, fix those 1 to 3s, and then we move on to the 5 to the 7s. We all wish we had the Tuscan Village, like the Salem School District does, and the monies that they get from that, but we don't. So, we have got to look at that moving down the road, and having a bond for a new building will at least allow us to take one, if not 2 schools that need repair out of the mix, so that there's more money left over for those other schools that need repairs, whatever those schools may be.
Just as a reminder to everyone, when you're looking at the financials, 23-24 is the last year that you'll be making a payment on the Gilbert H. Hood Barker project. So in that will be a savings in the budget of 1.2 million, and then you will have only one bond remaining, which is for the Honeywell project, which is going to expire in 2033, and so you'll continue to have payments till 2033 for Honeywell in the range between 800,000 and 900,000, depending on which year it is, because it's the amortization.
Isn't it right that is a bond that has a cost, it has a guaranteed savings on the flip side, so it balances itself
yes.
out? So it's not like the Barker bond and just having a cost.
Yes.
It's on both sides of the books.
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
So, to Jonathan's point, and I brought that up, the $1.2 million up a long time ago, and also closing the school, we talked about what that would save. We have potential savings of $2 million a year. So we, on top of what we're talking about here, we have a roof within the next 5 years, a minimum of $5.5 million. And, as much as we want to say the surplus will get us there each year, it won't. clearly. As we've recognized in previous meetings, as we come out of COVID, the surpluses are going to get smaller and smaller as the years go on. We've seen an higher than we'd ever seen. So to Jonathan's point, I think when first budget meetings in 2 weeks or 1 week, whatever it is, we need a real plan to figure out how do we fund. If we can't get a bond passed and the capital reserves don't cover everything we need to figure out in the budget how we fund above and beyond what we're, the little stuff that we can do for the couple $100,000, and we need a real plan to make that happen, because, we just don't have it right now, and I'm going to say this, and I'm really disappointed where we're at today. I was elected 6 months ago, and I feel like we haven't made much progress. The only progress we've made was we want a new school. I get that, and I voted for that. But from a Plan B perspective or an ongoing perspective, I don't feel like we have anything real substantive that we can say that we can present to the community. We promised the community something by the end of the year to talk about a Plan B option, and we have nothing really. And we have something right here, but I don't know if that's what we need. I think we need more, and I think we're just not there. And I don't know what to say anymore about that, but I'm just not comfortable where we're at and where we need to be. So that's where I come.
Yeah, and I think our emphasis on Plan B was, and it's nice to know I wasn't aware of that, about we could still put in a bond the following year, because we still have 2 years for the town to decide. So if it doesn't pass in 23, we could put it on again and see if it passed in 24. But the capital improvement account is something that we, Gordon Graham came and talked about that a few school board meetings ago, or a couple of school board meetings ago. And we didn't get into the nitty gritty ourselves as far as, where we go with repairs and such. I do think we need some more information, as I said, about, okay, this brings it to like new. What brings it to giving us years and years and decades worth of life without a brand new look to the building, and see if there's any difference there as far as the monies. And I do think we need to, how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time type of thing. I think we need to start, and I do believe maintenance has been doing that and prioritizing and so forth. And, I think we all have some hard decisions to make. A lot of our conversations were around class size. Do we want to raise class size? No. It's great for the kids to have the class sizes we have, but it costs money. It's great that we bus students because, for whatever reason, the school board has to pay for the fact that we don't have sidewalks. And I went down Cemetery Road today. I don't know how anybody can walk, ride a bike, or even possibly fall into the gully on a road like that. It's 2 pieces of tar with a line down the middle. So, but it's up to the school board to then be extra beneficial to the town when we don't have to pay for high school busing, but we're paying for it. We don't have to pay if you're within 2 miles, but we pay if we let you ride if you're up to 1 mile away. These are all things that the school board has done for our students, but they cost money. And sooner or later, we have to decide if we can keep doing that. And I'm not saying that we're going to stop doing that, but sometimes I think people don't understand what the school board has done and the decisions they have made, which have benefited our schools and benefited our students, but they cost money.
Dave, I agree. I'm disappointed in that we, not probably the same thing, but the degree of specificity that we lack. I distributed a memo that I drafted. It wasn't meant to be gospel or anything, some time ago, about looking at what exactly needs to be fixed and what can we afford at different stages, and delineating what the cost would be if we had done this. If we went to the next stage, what would the cost would be? Excuse me. I looked at floor plans, for instance, for South Range and Derry Village, and I looked at the bathrooms. And I said, well, how can they be reconfigured, and if we kept them and break out walls and encroach in other areas and make them suitable? And I'm not an architect, I'm not a structural engineer, I don't know, but I know that the square footage we have is what the square footage we have, and I can't see doing that. I know I talked to Eric when we were down doing the walk-arounds at the other two schools, at Derry Village and South Range, and I asked them about alternative materials. We seem to be dedicated to this whole brick veneer on the outside of buildings, and we can see where a masonry has not stood up very well to New England winters. 20 years ago, we had a little over 20 years ago, we had major reconstruction and additions put on both of those schools, and you can see the crumbling of the windowsills and everything else. They're much more durable and less costly exteriors that you can use, albeit they are not as aesthetically pleasing or as stately looking, but they work, and as long as they work well and they cost less, we need to investigate those. But we haven't done any of that stuff at all. We've gone over and over and over the 5, 6, 7, 8, the 5, 6, and 7, 8 over and over. It's like beating a dead horse. And, we've got to move on with something. And I don't see that we're doing it, coming back and talking about the same things over and over again. We need to come up with a plan B that's going to be a functional plan B with a bottom line number on it, or preferably a number of bottom lines. If we had, what do we need to get by? What do we need that would make us comfortable? And then, of course, what could we do that would be the soups and nuts? But we haven't done any of that.
You can go first, Brenda, then I'll go.
I'm pretty sure since we started talking about what we were going to do, I've been saying, let's fix the schools, let's figure out what we need. I came in with a list several times of what I thought from the report, what was important. So there's that. The other thing that I'm thinking back to about 5, 6, 7, 8, our kids are going to change schools 4 times. If you're at deep, you could change 5. And just the past 2 years alone, we know how important it is for kids to be together, to have that connection, to have that community, and changing schools 4, 5 times doesn't give them that. And that's important. Dollars are important, but kids are more important to me.
Nobody's going to argue with students being more important than dollars. I'm still a firm believer in coping skills. And I believe sometimes that we put too much emphasis on things like transition. Transition is a part of life. And I don't know that we can make these fiscally responsible decisions in that small of a window. Again, you got to understand something. When we talk about neighborhood schools, it's a great concept. Once again, keeping those neighborhood schools is expensive. It is more expensive. When we look at enrollment, right? When we look at enrollment and say, what are we going to do in the elementary school? Well, if we had grade-specific schools, you would be worrying about one teacher in each grade level, K through 6. Now we worry about 5 teachers in each grade level, K through 6, when we look at enrollment. So no matter what we do, there's going to be people that like this and don't like this. There's always going to be problems that we run into I agree with Paul. We've got to make some decisions, and I understand where you're coming from, Brenda. I know you love the neighborhood schools, and I know you want to keep all these schools open. I understand that. And you're not alone.
But so does the community. We heard it loud and clear over and over and over. So
Well, then,
we need to listen to that as well as
Okay.
to how are we going to make this all work.
so is the community prepared to pay for the repairs that we need to make? Because if the community is prepared to pay for the repairs, I've got no problem keeping all of our schools open and running them. But we've been cutting our budget since 2008. And it keeps getting cut, and it keeps getting cuts, and we are in the position we are in, and the school board is getting thrown under the bus for deferring all these maintenance costs because we keep cutting the budget. And so when we look at this situation, okay, I have no problem. I would love to keep all of our schools exactly the way they are, fix them up.
So I think at this point,
I'm just concerned where the money is going to come from.
I don't think we've ever given the community the information about the repairs that are needed and the cost that's needed, because so many questions have been asked. They heard about a new school. They heard about the giant book that Jeremy has, which is very beneficial. I have to keep saying that because I totally think that was money well spent. But I don't think we've ever really, because Paul asked, David asked, you asked, and I've asked, what are the costs to make the schools what they need to be whole? I was told there's no concerns of safety. I asked that over and over. No, there are no safety concerns. So how do we figure out what it is that they need? What is that cost? And then have that discussion. And it may be a warrant article this year. It may be a warrant article in a couple more years. It may be building aid for repairs, whatever the case is. I still say we were short-sighted, and I still say we missed the boat.
And the one thing, I don't know if I'll agree with the short-sightedness, but I do agree with you that we do need to know when we look at these, and we have a chart now that tells us what we have to do for our roofs. We know right now we can look, I think it was $11 or $12 million to completely fix from a replacement standpoint the roofs. So we have a very good idea. But again, we know what we can do, what we need to do 1 to 3. We know what we do. So I agree with you. We do need more information about, okay, if we can't bring these schools up to new school, flexible spacing, how can we bring these up to a level and what kind of a cost that will, and we will absolutely look into that and move further with that. I do agree with you on that.
So I think that leads well into hearing what Lavalley Brensinger has to say, because I think one of the things that, Brenda, you're alluding to, which is really important, what will it cost to bring our schools up? I think one of the things the town has to realize is we as a town are going to have a fundamental philosophical shift in how we approach budgeting. I've been in this town 17 years, and I have never known us to have a budget that's over default because we want it to pass. If we are to do any major repairs in our schools and do any improvements and bring things up to par and even a little bit above, we are going to have budgets that are over default, and we are going to need them to pass in order to do anything, a new school or significant repairs. That is a humongous philosophical shift from how we run now, and it's something every single person will have to face and make hard decisions about in the voting booth, because if those things are voted down, we're left with even worse than we have now, making huge cuts and shrinking kids into other classes. So I think regardless of what decision we make, this town has to face this fundamental philosophical shift we're facing after years of penny pinching and making sure budgets pass and maintain what we have. The only way to fix what we have, to maintain what we have and fix it, is to have budgets that are over default, that actually meet our needs and aren't focused on passage. And that's a really difficult thing that we often don't talk about, but I think that's where we're at as a town, and I think people need to understand that. So I think that leads well into what are we going to do next? Well, we do have a presentation now about what our our current plan is and what those financials will look like, then we as a board can have a further discussion about that. But before we do that, I will give the folks that are here, you can each come up and speak for 3 minutes and give your input on what you've heard.
Erica, I don't mean to jump in, but it would be more beneficial for those that are here to hear the Lavalley thing.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tracy. I was going to let Lavalley speak first so you can speak to both presentations.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to be unclear about that. My apologies. Sorry, my apologies. I meant to say, listen to both presentations and then you can have your input and then we'll discuss further.
Are we on? Are we on? All right, it's time for us. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Well, thank you again for having us here today. Jay Doherty, Eric LeBlanc, we've been working with you for over a year now. What we'd like to do is just a quick recap of where we've been. Then we want to talk about where we are right now with the current plan and the financials. We want to talk about waivers and the next steps that we would do to stay on track of what we're talking about for a project. And then we'd also like to talk about if there's any changes based on everything we just talked about now, how the project may be adjusted, and if we want to react to that and how that plays into that. And then obviously do what is best for you and for the students of here at Derry. So let's jump into it real quick with a little bit of a recap.
So actually, if you want to jump to the next slide. So these were the three pieces that we started with. We're going to go through each of these very briefly just to remind you of the process that we went through. So the next slide, facilities assessment. So we worked closely with a team of engineers, civil engineers, structural engineers. We toured each of your buildings. Really what we were looking for was to do a health check on each of your buildings, to really do a diagnosis on every part and piece of that building. So we did very extensive tours. We really want to get a good handle of the condition of your building systems. That includes the exterior envelope, it includes mechanical systems, structural systems, to really get a good full report card of how that building is doing from a standpoint of facilities. The result of that, I won't go through the full report, but we did produce that long 800+ page report that really details many of the issues that we saw. It included recommendations of how you could move forward. There's some highlights on your screen that include notes about the exterior envelope of some of the buildings that are deteriorating, including precast sills and masonry failing. We looked at ADA accessibility in bathrooms, which is a code issue. And we also looked at the condition of certain materials. We looked at, if you advance to the next slide, we did look at some structural conditions in the gymnasiums. There should be one more slide. We looked at rooftop units and the conditions of those mechanical systems, as I said, electrical systems, and everyone's favorite photo of the sanitary lift in the kitchen, which we understand is, a constant maintenance issue. Really, the objective of this was to serve as a roadmap for you. So it's really another tool for the next 10 and 20 plus years to look at how do we start to prioritize what the biggest needs are for each of your buildings, and where we need to focus our efforts to really bring these buildings up to modern standards.
So from that, we moved into educational visioning. We brought David Stevens in. We had 3 meetings. If you go to the next slide. We had 3 meetings with David Stevens to look at the initiatives the school district is trying to implement. And we had a great meeting with some of the school board members, the community, and some of the staff to go through that. Really to look at the big picture of things, programs, and initiatives that are going to get implemented, and how we look at the schools and how these spaces that you currently have can work with these pieces.
So the master plan was really taking into account what Jay just went through, the visioning, and then what I just spoke to, which was the facilities report. So really meshing those two together to understand where the building needs were, both from a facility standpoint, but also from an educational standpoint. So we did look at all of the buildings. We looked at options for how we could renovate each building, do small additions to buildings. We wanted to look at options for consolidating buildings, as well as building new. Really, everything was on the table, and we were trying to get as much input from you as well for what your goals would be for moving forward with the full report. Oh, sorry, I was going to speak to the slide too. So the result of that is essentially we came up with kind of a ranking system for each of your schools. Not surprisingly, the newer schools fared fairly well with newer systems, newer mechanical systems, newer roofs. Some of your older schools like Grinnell, South Range, and Derry Village, we know that they're older buildings. They have old systems that are failing and are in need of replacement. You heard Jeremy talk about roofs, and I understand you had a detailed roof report done, which I think is great. But really, the result of that master plan was understanding where we stand with each of your schools.
So as part of that master plan, we also looked at each of the schools individually. We looked at what could be done at each of them, some small repairs and some larger repairs, to bring them all up to to meet those initiatives and to bring them up to like new standard. We went through in depth of how we would do that as a very conceptual manner. Can you go to the next slide? Then we looked at if there's a possibility of consolidating or making two schools into one new school and what that would do for the long-term vision of your buildings. So obviously looking at Derry Village and South Range were the two that we looked at. And then as we've already talked about the big picture, the costs, how they play into this. Go to the next slide. Obviously some savings with staffing as well as operations, and then some sale of the building. I'm not going to go through all of those, but we've talked about these, how combining buildings could be some savings for the district. So lastly, that brings us to building aids. So the next step we did was we've taken our conceptual design and we've turned that into a design, a schematic design, or a design that someone could price. Can you go to the next slide? So we came up with a site plan and floor plans. We worked with the committee to kind of work through a design option that would solve the needs of merging two schools and on the Derry Village site, as you can see there. And then we have brought a construction estimator, Mark Jobin, to review that conceptual design and to give us a price of what that design would cost. And that brings us to our state funding. So these are some of the things that we know are ineligible. I should slow down when I talk. For state building aid. So as we went through this is the state's list that is in their packet. Well, we went through each one of these trying to determine parts that would count for state building aid and parts that wouldn't. As we talked about earlier, we know deep, that does not count. Things, as you'll see in here, costs related to finances or bonding charges or your legal costs, those do not count. We've really tried to lean the project back to get as many things that would count into the project. One of the things that we were a little surprised about is the 35-year rule that we'll talk about in a second here, and how that plays into this. So these are three obstacles that have popped up. Brenda, thank you very much for asking us to look at the past building aid application, which we just did. The 35-year rule was not in the previous application, so that was something that was amended recently, which plays a little bit into...
In March 2022. So that's huge.
So there's three pieces that play into this, and these are three things that some I think we have abilities to ask waivers for, and some things we don't. The middle one I want to talk about first, and when we met with the state and we walked through the building, they talked about their state funding is going to be, they're going to ask for the way the legislature is written is up to $50 million per year for state funding for all these projects, the ranked projects. So it would be $100 million for the 2 years put together. However, they already have $51 million allocated for other projects that won't be included in our state funding. So as we try to get our ranking, we obviously want to try to get as high as we can, because the funding that we thought was allowed or was going to be somewhat available obviously is not even half of what we thought it would be. The 35-year rule, which is a new piece that does tie into that, and we have an addition that was done in 2001 that plays into a portion of the square footage that the state will not allow us to rebuild or to build new, so we have to take that out. I think we have a great argument, or a great, not argument, but case as we submit a waiver. The construction of that area is one of the worst. When we walk around and we look at the sills, we look at the facade of that building. So that 35 years rule, we definitely want to submit a waiver for and try to re-include that square footage back into our project. The other piece is the 120 square feet per student, and that's something else we already talked about. Our design building is about 146 square feet per student. Your current elementary schools are over that. They're 156 and 160 something. So you're already over those numbers. We're building a more efficient design. However, we're still over that state 120. The state has in the past accepted waivers for that number, so we will submit a waiver for that to try to increase that number back to what we're projecting our dollars or our square foot per student would be. There is one other waiver that I didn't have on that list, and it's more of a clarification waiver, and that is just how the state is calculating dollars per square foot. If you look at the total project dollars per square foot, which is not typically the way you do it, you would get a different number than looking at the actual bricks and mortars dollars per square foot, because there's other pieces that tie into that, such as site, such as legal costs, such as equipment, such as your mechanical your food service equipment and other furniture and other pieces like that, which are typically a different pot than your dollars per square foot when we talk about a building. So we want to clarify what the dollars per square foot is, again, to try to get more money or be apples to apples with other districts asking for money. So that brings us to a chart that I've briefly put together here. So I want to obviously start at the very top of this, and we've all known this from day one, that there is no guarantee for state funding. It depends on our ranking. It depends on what the state actually, the legislation actually puts forward to give for money for state aid. If there's a significant amount of money, if there's approved money for the project, all these play into this. So there's no guarantee, and the state will not guarantee that anyone's getting any money anywhere. So that's the very top, and I think that we've been clear about that from the beginning, that there's a possibility that zero could be up there. We are trying for the last one, which is to get you $28 million. As you can see, the minimum amount right now the state has is 13.8. And then obviously we want to go through those clarifications and whatever waivers we can to get us to the next category, which would be that 21. Then, as we talked about, the construction cost waiver, and then the square foot per pupil, and then obviously the 35-year rule would get us up to that 28. So the next step we would have after the ranking comes out would be to apply for waivers to try to get as many of these as we can. So I have option A and option B written up here. Now these are not plan A and plan B as we've been talking about earlier. They're just options that I think we'll just briefly talk about. Option A is to stay the track. As we've been talking about, we've developed a master plan. We've worked through that master plan to come up with the consolidation of two schools, combining two schools, and the schools that were chosen were Derry Village and South Range, and to continue on to see how we do for state ranking, and to submit waivers to try to get as much funds as we possibly can get. Then there's obviously another option if we want to switch courses, and the state, as I've talked to them, is more concerned about us solving all the issues we've brought to their attention in the reports and in the application, which are such things as air quality, amount of outlets in classrooms, facades that are failing, roofs, space for breakout space and educational spaces we're talking about, the nursing spaces that are inadequate, all those pieces and the enhanced security that we're adding to the new building. So if we can meet all those, there is another option for us to look and pivot to do something different. So this is kind of the point where I'd love to have a conversation, and for you to tell me, help us try to figure the best route for you for the next steps. Do you have any questions on what I've just said? Because I've kind of flew through it, but I think we've all seen a lot of this stuff before, so I was trying to go pretty quick.
So I'm certain probably numerous members of the board have questions. Would the board prefer that we ask our questions or first let members of the public give their input? I'm open to. I think for flow, if you guys don't mind stepping aside, we'll let the 4 members of the public that are here, you can each speak for 3 minutes and give your input, and then the board will discuss what we've both heard and what you folks have to say. So just like any other meeting, please just state your name and your address for the record. Thank you.
Tracy Zisk, 5 Silver Street. I apologize, I came in late, so this may have been addressed. My question is, how come the complete agenda did not go up until 4 hours before tonight's meeting?
It's a facilities workshop. That was the agenda, facilities.
But not all the information was presented. It wasn't posted until 1 o'clock today. All the missing documentation.
I'll take the hit on that. My secretary's been out since Thursday, and I've got no excuse other than I'm learning the ropes, and she had the Lavalley one, so I think she put that up on Friday. I should have given her mine on Friday. That was my mistake.
Okay.
I apologize.
Just because, and I understand you're new, but this has been a continuous problem. So if it's something you could look into, because by law it needs to be up 48 hours in advance, which with the weekend, that would make it on a Friday. The general public needs to see everything 48 hours. If not, any resident can report it to the Attorney General. And at this point, I think, I know for a fact the residents are ready to go that route. Finding out information 4 hours before a meeting, even if it is a workshop is on the agenda, it's open to the public, we have the right to be here, we need the right to be notified per the law, which is 48 hours in advance. So I just kindly ask, I understand she's sick, it's that time of year, but this gets up by Friday. Because if not, it is going to be reported. I just can't be rearranging my life to be here 3 hours later when it's something I could have or other people could have, and then we get the pushback. The community is not involved. The community is not here. Well, there's reasons for that. We don't know what we're to see. Like I said, she was sick. That's fine. Going for it. Please have it up by Friday. If not, it'll be reported to the Attorney General. The next, Jane, this question's for you. You keep pushing back on David demographics, and you said you spoke to George, and George has gotten the most updated information.
Davis Demographics met with George, yes.
When was the last time was the updated information?
It would have been prior to the report being done, and I can look up when the date was of that was. Tracy, hold on.
Just to clarify, while she's looking at that, we are required to post a meeting notice 48 hours, not a specific agenda 48 hours.
Are you sure about that? You have that in writing somewhere?
We just had a presentation at the previous school board meeting that spoke about that.
Okay, perfect.
Usually our board meeting agendas are up on Friday with most of the presentations, not all of them, because some are still being worked on like the Monday or Tuesday morning before, but usually those Friday postings for our regular school board meetings are up with a lot of the items there. Not all of them, and they won't always be there, but for these types of workshop meetings, we sometimes won't know exactly what's going to be discussed until we come to them, because it's a workshop. This is our work. We have to do it in public. We sometimes won't even know what we're going to talk about, because it's here. It's meant to do our work in public. We have to do it in public. We don't know if someone's going to bring up, hey, let's talk about this. So apologize, I wasn't up
I
sooner.
understand that, but if you need to do research on something, how can you just randomly talk about it to the public if you're just getting that information?
Some of it
This isn't geared for the public. This meeting is geared for us to work amongst ourselves.
Okay.
We always invite you. And
Okay.
tonight, this is
the
even
difference
special.
between a public meeting and a workshop.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Some of this meeting is also an update. For instance, we as a board didn't get the information about the roofs till this afternoon. The board didn't get the printout with all the roof information till this afternoon.
But you as chair, wouldn't you ask for that to have your board prepared?
It wasn't ready till this afternoon.
Wouldn't you make a phone call saying we have a meeting, have it prepared for
They
the
told
meeting?
me it would be ready for this meeting, but this has been an ongoing process, and this is part of the workshop, getting updated information on the roofs. This is a workshop. By law, they're required to be open to the public, but it is a workshop. It's not like a school board meeting. It operates under different rules.
I understand that. I just don't understand how you can absorb information all at once without reviewing it. It's like getting tossed. You walk in the door. Here's your information. Here you go. Figure it out. That's not beneficial to you either.
We've been discussing the roofs at each of the last two workshops, and we were just waiting on numbers, and tonight we got those numbers.
Okay, so back to David demographics.
I believe the presentation was December 14th, 2021.
So it's not up to date with all the changes that have happened in the last, since December with the planning board, knowing that your school board, you probably.
You have 30 seconds left.
And I'm going to ask for an extension because this is important.
You can have an extension after other people have spoken.
Okay. So then you all know about Strawberry Hill. Am I fair in saying that? You know about it. You are shaking your head. Do you know about Strawberry Hill?
You can finish your input. This is a discussion for a workshop. We welcome public input.
And this goes with the demographic question, which is part of the workshop.
Hey, Tracy, would you just mind sharing your point on it?
So
Thank you.
what I'm asking is, if you're going by information that is archaic, because the planning board has made several changes to all the development going up 28, down Rockingham Road, and now over on Strawberry Hill, the numbers of townhouses have just changed at Butterfields. I'm assuming you all know that they've added an additional 40 townhouses that would not be included in this number. They've also put up Strawberry Hill, which is 20 acres that could be developed, and that is walking distance to South Range, as well as all the other changes that keep happening. My biggest question is, and once again, I understand your school board, you're not planning board, but if you're planning and you're working with consultants, the biggest problem right now, and it's being addressed, is all of these you all keep being told are market rate, and it isn't going to impact the schools. What I'm telling you is it's market rate right now for the developers, and it has been addressed at the planning board. Have the developers been locked into maintaining them at market rate? And it was responded no. And if any of you understand that, that means the second those are built, they can become affordable housing. They can go Section 8, just like the fairways, which will impact the numbers on the schools dramatically. That is what I'm trying to bring to your attention. And as things are changing, 9, 10 months later, the information you're making pertinent decisions on is outdated because things are changing hourly with the town of Derry and the amount of development that is coming. We know that. And obviously you don't know as much as some of us that are directly impacted that live in the neighborhood.
So we do appreciate that there's information we may not have, so we will look further into that. Is there any other input you'd like to provide?
I'm hearing a lot tonight. You'll be looking into a lot, and that is getting old, Erica, at every single meeting. I need numbers. This was even stated tonight. Everything is, we need to look into this. We need to look into, please start looking into this.
We hear
because
you
we're
about
going to-
Strawberry Hill. What else would you like us to look into? Please finish up your input so we can hear from others as well.
When was the last time this was updated, and when will it be updated since it's already archaic? It's old. This is an invalid, these numbers from David Demographics are not valid. They're just not. And that's not something you can do, I can do. The developers are changing their numbers. The planning board's approving they're changing. You're not aware of the numbers. It's going to impact the
I
schools.
hear you on that. I'm just asking what other input you have tonight besides those numbers so that we can hear from other members of the public.
Okay.
I would like
Well,
to hear what everyone has to
One other thing that
say.
you're all aware of, and I was surprised that it was asked tonight, was the difference between South Range and Derry Village dollar-wise. If you all read the report, you know it's a $1 million difference, being that Derry Village is $1 million more than South Range. It's all in your reports. Thank you.
Elizabeth LaFosse, Trent Road. I echo a lot of what Tracy had to say. So also, Mr. Clapp, I also echo your sentiments with the disappointment this evening. It's been 6 months, and we campaigned on XYZ, and there was a lot of focus on facilities and exactly where we're at tonight. And it's hard to say without laughing, but the town is not going to go with what everyone is insisting we go with. Now, respectfully, Erica, we know that we need to accept a budget that is over default because it's what we need. However, being backed into a corner at this stage of the game where the entire world is upended and some families are worried about just affording oil this year, let alone a $75 million new school and consolidating their children and redistricting and what's going to be happening at Westgate and Strawberry Hill. And there's 2 giant properties going up for sale in Kilray on the east side of town. I don't know if you're aware of that. The junkyard and all of this. There's so much that goes into the decision that the school board and the administration is asking of the voters that it's very short-sighted, it's very intimidating at best, and the town is going to give you hell for what we need. And it's unfortunate, but please be ready for that feedback. Got a couple more things here. Plan B is a cop-out. Again, 6 months ago, we elected, 2 of the same people respectfully. We got a new one here. The only one that was talking about facilities. We need to be looking at facilities. And, again, we're here today. I would like to ask one question. Who decided to make public comment available this evening for a workshop that does not usually provide public comment?
I did, because I was hoping people would come and give public comment, because the last 2 facilities workshops, no one came.
Respectfully, when every school board meeting and facilities meeting, the public is reminded this is deliberation only. Public comment is not respectfully allowed. This is discussion only. To 3 hours at 1 o'clock this afternoon to have the public notified that they could be here this evening to address all of this. I would like to be turned back on, please. I'm not going to swear again. The choice that you made was a very nice one to have the public come and comment tonight because this affects all of our children and our pocketbooks. But the agenda was up, it said nothing about public comment, and then just because the chair decides, well, maybe we should have public comment available now. Tracy rearranged herself. I rearranged myself. I had lots of things going on tonight, and I came here to address all of you this evening. And I guarantee you, the District of South Range would be here tonight if they knew more than 3 hours in advance that they could be here, because they care so much that their school is getting closed and that their children are going to be sent off to my area. I live on the east side of Derry. They're all going to be shipped over that way. They don't want that. And respectfully, they don't want to hear from Austin saying, well, you're going to have to pay for it because it's just where we are. And they don't want to hear from the board saying, well, you're going to have to just accept it because that's just where we are. Everyone is mad. And falling back on the town council, well, maybe we can have the town and we can, deliberate and stuff. Enough with collaborating with town and all of this nonsense. You're going to get pushback. People are mad. I'm still yielding questions about what hasn't gotten done and where we're at, and it's sad, frankly. And I just hope that we can get ourselves together here as a Derry unit and figure something out, make it palatable to the voters, and stop shoving it in their face that this is what you have to choose from, like it or eat it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Colleen Breyer, Sunset Ave. Thank you for that. Sorry. Okay, so on the same notes as her, this sounds really weird. I found out at 6. I'm cooking dinner, really hungry, find out about this. I go through the roof. I'm really upset. Didn't eat my dinner, had to come down here. But this, I understand you guys are hanging on to the same facility study. You put all this effort in. We talked about it was 5 years and everything. But you're just not, willing to stray from your plan of let's just close South Range and let's just build a mega school. None of these presentations have any actual important numbers. You're talking about closing the SAU building, but you have no clue where you're going to put them. So my guess is you're going to want to build a new building for that, because you already said in the past that there was security problems in the schools because you couldn't spread the SAU people in the facilities. You said they needed a separate entrance. I remember it. And yeah, you said that wouldn't work. So I'd like to know the plan on that. You talked about the deep kids. You have no idea where you're putting them. You didn't mention next charter school. I thought that was interesting. Actually, she brought that up. And then it's just sad. The things I've heard tonight, I was mad before I came here, and now I'm just really sad. He spoke about the whole child and everything, but then you say in the same night that there's too much emphasis on transitions and that we shouldn't be focusing on that. But the year you're talking about 5th graders being pushed into middle school and having to get up at the crack of dawn while it's still dark to ride a bus across town, and so they're going to have to get up at 4:30 in the morning. These are preschoolers that were in COVID, masked. They had to sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice since preschool, and now you're asking them for more. It's sickening, honestly. These neighborhood schools are important. They're still trying to figure out so much of what they had lost as preschoolers, and you're talking about just shoving them off. Oh, they're going to get up early. Are they even going to have the same schedule as 6th graders? Are they going to have to switch classes? What does any of this mean? You have nothing in these reports that talk about it. You talk about saving money on staff, but what does that mean? You're going to fire 100 teachers? This presentation tells us nothing. Absolutely nothing. I think if you're applying for building aid, you should be just talking about repairs at this point. And I like the article about going over budget so that you can start saving for these kind of things, but this is no bueno. Do you have anything else? I'm sorry, I forgot to say anything. What else? I would like to add that South Range School is a lot more than just brick and mortar. That school is, everybody thinks their school is the best school, but I'm telling you, it's different there. I know substitute teachers that go around and everything. The minute you step into that school, it is the best community ever. It's amazing. And we just built our outdoor classroom, and it's wonderful, and we can add to it each year. We talk about special ed, kids needing sensory breaks and movement breaks. What's better than an outdoor classroom for that? But hey, let's just bulldoze it and call it a day, right? Is there anything else? Oh, one more thing. Actually, I have a lot of things. One more thing. Talking about enrollment, he said that the numbers were the lowest in 10 years. I was just at a South Range PTA meeting, and actually our numbers are steadily increasing. We're at an all-time, not all-time, but we actually have more kids enrolled than we have had in the last 10 years. So that totally debunks what he just said. We're going to have 356 kids in that school next week. So, yeah. So I appreciate you guys. I appreciate that even though I found out at 6:30, I do appreciate that I had the ability to come down and say something. But there's no way that anybody's going to want to vote on this. That's it, I guess. I mean, I have a lot. But.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to add anything? You're the last person who hasn't spoken. Don't worry, Richard. We'll wait for you.
At the council meeting, I try and sit in front so that the delay is not too much. Good evening. Richard Tripp, 44 Wyndham Road. I'm sorry I was late tonight, but I wanted to speak at the council meeting about their Canada's legislation they're asking us to pass. Oh, I'm a state representative. So I asked them that if you were interested in the legislature doing something about this, that you provide more guidance than just we want legal marijuana.
Richard, can you speak into the microphone? We're having trouble hearing you.
All right, I'm sorry. Oh, by the way, I thought it was interesting when Paul said speak into the microphone, because, you know, sometimes you guys talk like this, and I can't hear you. You know, so this is one of those things that don't ask us to do something that you guys don't do. But anyhow, like I said, I was talking to the school board tonight, not school board, well, I am talking to the school board, but previously I was talking to the council about if they want to achieve a goal, they have to communicate that goal. You know, because just asking the state or the town's representatives to fight for. Oh, could you hear that? Anyhow, to fight for legalization of marijuana doesn't really tell us what your end goals are. You know, because I know Josh has said that, well, we want more money. I said, well, what are you going to do with the money? Because that's important. You know, if you're going to use the money to cut property taxes, I think people will support you. But, you know, if you're just saying, oh, we're going to spend more money, you know, that's not something that a lot of the townspeople want. So anyhow, my comments not dealing with the council. Austin, when you were talking about the town, were you talking about the council, or are you talking about voters? Because you said, well, the town's not going to approve this. Do you mean that in the way that the voters are not going to approve, like the warrant, or is it that the town's not going to cooperate?
When we talked about the vote, it was the townspepeople, whether or not they would
thank
support
you.
it. Would they or would they not vote for it?
Because it wasn't clear to me. Like I said, I didn't get here early tonight. I understand that you guys were given some numbers for the roof repairs.
We were.
Okay, is that going to be posted eventually?
Sorry. Yes, they will. We just got them this afternoon.
Lean into the microphone, please. But anyhow, having been on the council recently, I know that the town valuation has gone up in the last few years, and that the town valuation allows either to the schools in the towns to collect more revenue or to lower tax rates. And while we have done a fair job of lowering the tax rates, because I believe it's only $26 per thousand now, I believe that the schools have been able to raise their budget over the years. So I'm just wondering, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, well, what exactly has the school done with the additional money for the past 10 years?
Richard, you have about 30 seconds. I've been giving everyone 5 minutes,
All
or
right.
4 minutes.
In some of the previous presentations, there was mention of the buildings are currently out of code. They're not up to code. I have a question. I believe someone has mentioned that at some point there's a threshold where if you do renovation or rehabilitation, that the schools have to be brought up to code. You don't have to answer that now. The last thing I have is, do you have an estimate of how much cash you'll have to do repairs? Because I know you've heard this before and again and again and again, but you should probably try and figure out how that money will be best spent. I understand that top of the priority list is the roofs, but if Jeremy has a list of things that he thinks are necessary, that's a great idea. And I'll quit since my time's up.
Just to let you know, our buildings are up to code because otherwise students couldn't occupy them, but there are things that are grandfathered just like in other situations.
So it's up to code, but you're grandfathered. That's a contradiction.
We meet the state requirements for all our buildings. They are safe to occupy. Otherwise, we couldn't have students in them.
So I'll make a quick comment to what Libby referenced about collaboration and meeting with the town and whatnot, and dovetail into what Richard just mentioned about communicating on, and you've come to previous meetings, Richard, asking us to talk to you about bills that we'd like you to file. So this meeting that's scheduled October 13th is not something that's out of the blue. It's part of a legislative liaison committee that was created some time ago. They just haven't met in 18 months. So the purpose of this meeting is to communicate our needs, the town's needs, to the state rep candidates that won their general primary election this past September. So you're getting both sides of the aisle coming together. We create an agenda where we have the different items that will help us meet the needs of the district, and the town did their thing. Cannabis is one of them. So I think this meeting is important, and Richard's articulated it several times at different meetings that communication is important to figure out what legislation we need, and hopefully we can communicate in more detail what that legislation would look like and how it would help us. And I'll give you one specific example since you asked, or Richard asked, where the money would be spent. Over the last 10 years, you mentioned our budgets have increased, correct? So I would say roughly 10 years ago, I don't have the dates exact, maybe it's 2013, 2012, the state used to fund 35% of our pension costs, which is an unfunded mandate. Richard, how much do they cover today? Zero. So that's one of the biggest topics we're going to have at this meeting. That's my topic. That's the one I contributed to the meeting, is we can't have one-time fixes, Band-Aids. You talk about us creating Band-Aids or kicking things down the road. You're kicking pension costs down the road. You give us 7.5% for 1 year when our budget's like almost $6 million. That does nothing. We need more than Band-Aid. Everyone wants to criticize us about doing Band-Aids and kicking things down the road. You're just as liable for that.
Okay,
I'm fine. No, let me finish.
we can't have personal
This
attacks
isn't
during
personal.
meetings.
He asked the question.
Just
He
focus
asked,
on the
how would we spend that
legislation,
money?
not on him.
Okay, fine. That's how we would spend the money, Richard. We don't have that 35% anymore. You do the math. What's 35% of $6 million? That's what we don't have anymore. And we need legislation that will not be a Band-Aid, but be a solution. Everyone comes to us and says, we need solutions from you guys. We need solutions from you, and this is what this meeting is hopefully going to accomplish. And that's my hope. And if anything, at least it communicates what our needs are, and then you can do what you want when you get elected. But you can't say we didn't communicate anymore, because we are going to communicate, and I hope you show up. 'Cause I got two people who aren't going to show up, so I hope you do.
So let's keep this meeting focused on facilities and what the facilities need. But, well, and I understand. We need to follow the rules of decorum. We need to follow the rules of decorum about what we can and cannot say in a public meeting. We're here to talk about facilities. This is our third facilities meeting. We've been talking about facilities seriously now for many years, and we got serious about it last spring and actually voted on something. We're now looking at that and seeing if we want to make any change to that vote at this time. So we've heard two presentations, one from the administration showing what they were interested in doing. We heard from Lavalley about where they're at. We've now heard from you folks, and we also the lines of communication are always open for people to email. I say that all the time, and if people email, we respond. People are welcome to come to school board meetings, but now we're at the point where if Jay and Eric want to come back to the table, the school board can ask any questions of either the administration, if they have questions about the administration's proposal, or Jay and Eric, if they have questions of Jay and Eric's proposal, or just a general discussion of where we go from here, given that this workshop is the time for us to discuss and determine what our next steps are. Brenda?
So I want to better understand what option B means. But one of the things I'm going to continue to discuss with people in Concord, and I would like us to continue to push it, is that DEEP comes out of the equation. Part of DEEP is mandated by law, and part of DEEP should at least be allowed to be part of the equation for building, right? I understand that we have typical peers and we have special education peers. The special education children, we're mandated, rightly so, and I'm so glad they're here, but we are mandated to educate them. So if we can't get funding for their space, where does it come from? So I've brought it up several times to different people in Concord, just a piece that I'd love for you to argue with whenever you have an ear for somebody, and I will continue to do the same thing because I think it's unfair. I understand the typical children. We don't mandate preschool, but we do mandate special education.
That's a very good point, and we will continue that argument, our case for you, because I agree with you. If it is mandated, we should be talking about that. So thank you for bringing that up.
I have a quick question for you. If we need to do a piecemeal cost estimate, like people are asking for, of if we don't bring it up like new, we bring it up to, good enough, or where do we have to hire the cost estimator again to get those numbers exactly?
So the numbers we presented before are order of magnitude numbers, and I think we explained that before. They're a rough concept. We're using historical dollars per square foot to figure out what pieces would cost. If we want a true number, that's not us, that's Mark Jobin, who was here before. He would have to do that. We would have to do a design so that he had something to price, and we would do that for you to try to figure out what that number is. But Mark Jobin would be the one that would price it, or you can find a different estimator if you weren't happy with Mark Jobin's numbers. But I think Mark did a great job for what we had. Richard had a very good point. And I just want to address his comment when it said some parts of the building aren't up to code or don't meet code. So there's civil codes, and there's life safety codes, and there's building codes. There's many different types of codes when we talk about that. The buildings are safe. I want to make sure we understand that. Everything that we've talked about that we thought was unsafe, the school has looked at and made sure they're safe. So there's nothing that's unsafe we're talking about when we talk about this.
Can I ask a quick question about that? So my understanding is that if you built a new school nowadays, you would need to put in a sprinkler system. And that's where the grandfathered came in. But Grinnell doesn't have a sprinkler system, and we've said that before in this meeting, but it is safe. It was built before they were required, if I understood it correctly.
Correct. So this is my second point, exactly you're hitting. So building code pieces. So there are current building codes which are different from when the buildings were built. When the buildings were built, there were certain codes that were in place. If we if we make changes to a major system in the building, we have to bring the rest of the building up to today's codes. And that has to do with not just fire code, like you mentioned, but seismic codes, which have to do with tying the structure back, and several other pieces that tie into that. It's not a dollars, if we spend a certain amount of dollars and we have to do something. It's when we do a major investment in a system in the building. So hopefully that clarifies what that means. Today's codes are different than they were every iteration that book is released. So it would be bringing it up to today's codes.
Just as a follow-up to Jessica's question, to get a ballpark figure without incurring the cost of an estimator at this point, additionally, if we took, or if we had you, take the costs that were given by the estimator and then put together what you would deem to be, getting us to be survivable. In other words, just meeting where we need the things that are really at the point now where they need to be addressed immediately, and then the things that would be nice. And the third thing is we already have a figure for that, which is, fix everything. Could you do that and then come up with, generally extract those figures from the estimator and put together what a first echelon and second echelon repair package would look like?
I wish we could, but we really can't. There's selective demo that would have to be done. He's given us a price for complete demo abatement, which is two very different things. What we're talking about for wall systems and structural upgrades obviously are not part of, when we talk about building a new building, we're just bringing it, we're just doing it. We're not making repairs to bring these parts up. So no, unfortunately, we can't just pull the line items off and build a report based on his numbers, because they're not apples to apples. They're very different. A new construction is very different than a renovated construction.
Just a question regarding if we were to do repairs, how feasible is it that we would be able to do the repairs simultaneously while educating kids in the classroom?
I think that's a very good question. That's something that came up at the committee level, and that's an answer we don't have, and that's one of the things that we definitely brought up is having students in those buildings when we're trying to renovate those buildings will be difficult, and will also extend, if we try to do an occupied construction, it's going to extend that construction period because they have to do smaller pieces to do that. So unfortunately we don't have an answer for that, but that is a downside of that idea.
Follow-up question. When you say lengthening repair times, does that also equate to more money spent?
Yes. So exactly. So the amount of time a contractor's here on site, they're charging you per month. So yes, exactly. Yep.
So is the other school districts I know have used brought-in portables, which is a terrible word for me, but they truly are temporary classrooms when they're doing construction. So that would be an option if we were to go that route.
It definitely would be an option. It's something we should look at. We found the cost payback for a portable, even for that temporary, like you're talking about, hasn't quite paid off. And when you look at the amount of time it takes, but I'm sure there's probably ways we could look at numbers of how much those cost to bring in, and then obviously to remove them, because that's the other piece. And what do you do with them? Because a lot of times they don't want to take them back after, which is terrible. Yeah, absolutely terrible.
One of the areas of maintenance or just improving the schools is electrical. We know that we don't have enough outlets in a lot of the rooms in some of the older buildings. The newer buildings I think are fine, but if we were to add more electrical in rooms, I think going through a couple of the schools with Jeremy, we've seen that those systems wouldn't be able to handle it. So at that point, would you basically have to bring the entire school up to current code if you're going to try to add electrical to certain rooms?
Yeah, so if you were to do those upgrades, in a lot of cases, you would have to upgrade your electrical panels. And in some cases, you would have to look at how the building is being served, if it has what kind of one-phase, three-phase power, what's going to the building currently. And then related to that, that ties into as you upgrade mechanical systems as well, because a lot of times those mechanical systems actually require more electricity as well. So.
Okay, that's the only question I have, but I think I do want to just provide some input to the board, and that would be that I think tonight before we leave we need to define some priorities for our Plan B. So what areas are we going to look at? We think the big ones we know of are roof, air, and building envelope and electrical. Those are the big ticket items. Some of them can go under Esser, some of them can't. We need to define a target bond amount or an annual spend amount that we're comfortable with. I think we want to come up, maybe look at both and just say, okay, well, we need 20 million if we're going to do a bond because it doesn't make sense to do 10, but that 20 million means it's going to be 60 cents on the dollar every year. So maybe we have to go backwards to an annual spend, and that will add 25 cents a year to the tax rate. So, and then, timing and logistics, I think one of the reasons we're all frustrated with where we're at, but we haven't done much, is because it's hard to get construction estimators out to the buildings to do anything. So I'm probably pretty happy that we got this roofing information now. I bet that they did a favor for us in getting it to us this fast, and when we only asked them like a month and a half ago to do this. And I imagine that this won't happen for all the other trades that we have to ask to come in and look at providing costs, because we could try to get an estimator for the whatever project we come up with, but we're still going to have people come out to site and bid on it. And that's going to be the hard part, and that's going to take much longer than this roof report did. So I think we need to come up with our priorities. We need to come up with a target fund amount, a bond amount, or an annual spend. And then, I guess the big decision is, do we continue with Plan A, which, it makes sense. We keep our hat in the ring. Maybe the legislature will do the right thing and increase the amount of funding available. Maybe they'll do the right thing and increase adequacy. It'd be a rainy day in hell if they did, but I think tonight we need to get organized. Let's come up with a couple priorities that we want to have for our next meeting, and then we'll all have homework for that meeting as to, let's go through this report and figure out which roofs we want to do in the next year. We know we're going to do this remedial maintenance, which is going to buy us that time. But then in the meantime, what other areas do we want to look at specifically? Because we know that we have HVAC, but those are 2 years out, so we need to make a decision on those within the next 30 days, I believe. Because we're going to lose our ESSER funding in 2024, and if it takes 2 years to get an HVAC unit, then we're done. So we need to get that information and make a decision on it. So that's my input.
So, but we need to understand what, and this is part of the problem too, right? What are we spending ESSER funds on? So how do we know what we're going to
I think
taxpayers to pay for?
I think we know that ESSER won't cover roofing. So if we
No, but HVAC.
Right, but right? I think that we can ask for some information for the next meeting, but in the meantime we can focus on, okay, what kind of roofing dollar do we want to come up with? We can focus on a conglomerate bond amount. So if we think that 15 million would pass, and we can get some new rate information. I don't think the bond market has gone as crazy as people think that it has. I know that, stocks have been up and down, and home mortgages have gone up quite a bit, but the bond market seems to be kind of finicky, so it may not be as bad as we think it is. And I know in the past someone has mentioned that they didn't want to do a bond, they just wanted to do annual spend. So what figure, if you want to start at the tax rate and then work backwards to a figure, let's do that. But let's have those dollar amounts ready for the next meeting, so when we come here we can say, okay, let's find $15 million worth of repairs, and then we can get in feedback for HVAC, for ESSER, and then we do know that some of the buildings have envelope issues, but those aren't, I don't believe those are as important as the roofing. Those can be done over time. Some of the brickwork and stuff. Electrical may be more of an issue. So let's focus on some couple items and get a game plan for the next meeting.
And perhaps some of the envelope issues will go away with the roofing being repaired.
Exactly.
I really want to understand option B, though. What does option B mean? In my head it means something, but I want to know what it means. The state is more concerned about the issues that are presented so I just need to understand that.
Yes, so we had option B in there. There's probably an option C. We could talk about if we move forward with removing 5th grade, how that does for the overall project. Remove deep out of there. We were just trying to have as a starting off point to start a discussion is there another way to look at this project if you wanted to veer course from what we've set out to do. So that's why we just threw option B out there, but there are other options too that would be part of that.
Is there funding available for option B? I guess that's where I was going with that. If the state's more concerned about the problems in solving them, is there funding available?
So what the state is concerned about, they're concerned that we're going to solve the issues. So if we don't check off all the things that we said we're going to do with these buildings, then our application would be null and void, and we'd be removed from the list.
What about the rule you were saying? There was some rule about the percentage it would cost to repair versus replace, and how that plays into the decision we make, just so we understand that we're making the best decision.
What rule is that? I'm sorry.
Well, there was some rule Jane, I believe, had mentioned that you can't have repairs that are a certain percentage of replacement costs. I don't want us to make the wrong decision and not take ourselves out of the running.
I'm not sure that there are.
Yeah, there's a certain percentage that your renovation is going to be higher than a new build. However, that's a waiver too. So if there's a compelling reason why doing the renovations makes more sense than to do the new build, you would have to argue that as well. So I think that both Jay and I mean, you can look at the numbers are a little bit different from my presentation, Jay's presentation. Both of us have talked to the state about school building aid, and what we have learned is it's very fluid and a lot of waivers. So yes, there is a percentage, and I think it's like a 60%, 65%. I'll have to look back to my notes, but there is a certain percentage of the cost of doing a brand new build. And when we both talked to them individually, it was to bring the building to be like new. So and back to one of your questions, if you're making it like new, it probably would be really difficult to do a full reno of like new while there's still students and staff in that building. You could do that if you were doing a new build and you moved the South Range students over to Derry Village, or if you had done a Grinnell Derry Village configuration, when the new school will be built, if you were going to renovate South Range, you'd move your South Rangers to the Derry Village till the renos were done. So unfortunately, school building aid, as much as we'd like it to be clean and perfect to understand, when we did the Hood Barca project, school building aid was completely different than it is now. And I think I mentioned even at our last meeting, was it 900 million? There was a lot of school building aid projects that happened from the time we did Barca and now that had no school building aid. So the formula is complicated. What qualifies is complicated. The 35-year rule was never clarified until very late.
And I do appreciate that. I just want to make sure whatever we're applying for, we're doing it right, so we keep ourselves in good standing. It wasn't a question that was trying to be derogatory in any way. I just want to make sure we dot all our I's.
I didn't take it that way, Erica.
Cross all our T's to make sure we know what we can and can't do.
Yes.
So I think Derek laid out well tonight that we do have some kind of basic decisions we have to make given the timing of where we're at with the application. We have to make that basic decision of whether we're going to stick with the application as as it's currently in, or whether we want to make the change. If we're going to stick with it as it's currently in, we don't need a motion of any kind, but if we're going to make any change, we would need a motion for what that is. One question I would have is, I just did some basic math and added up your estimated cost repairs for each building, and there was a low number and a high number, and if you just add up all the low numbers, which I kind of took to be what you need to do, but not what would improve educationally, it's what you need to do to bring things up. That gets to about 113 million, but there's a number of questions in there. I don't know how much of that is HVAC stuff that might be covered by something else, or if there are things in there that are impertinent, and I know Derek was looking for a number, and I don't know if that number is or isn't a good place to start and say, okay, what do we subtract from that for Esser, or what do we subtract from that for other reasons? I agree with him, that's kind of where we need to establish a number, but I didn't know if those numbers would be a helpful starting point or not. Maybe you guys could.
So if you add up the numbers from the report's all about fixing the pieces, so Band-Aids. It would be to fix all the individual pieces. How they play into other pieces, such as let's drop a new mechanical unit on the roof to get better air into the building. Obviously, we have to look at the structure and make sure that roof can handle that. We'll have to look at all the other pieces that tie into that. So there might be added pieces that do tie into all those numbers, but that's probably a good place to start. And then we figure out what the plan is or the way we want to go. We want to make sure we have all the other pieces that would tie into that.
Jane and Jeremy, would you, at least as a starting point towards that Plan B, be able to try to figure out, if possible, what would come out of that number? When you give your presentation at the following, what would be HVAC Esser funded things? Because I know a number of things identified in that were HVAC Esser things. Or is that a bigger ask than I'm imagining it?
No, that's kind of what we started with Honeywell and this past week, to try and get those numbers and try and
because that would drop that number somewhat significantly. So I'm just curious.
Would be the HVAC portion.
Yeah, I'm just curious what that number is if you take out the HVAC portion. I think that might. Derek, does that get towards what you're looking for? I think that would be really helpful to be part of that presentation.
I know that they're going to come to the board meeting, but I'm not sure that they're going to have estimates of what those items are going to cost at this point. We can talk to Jim Lucy tomorrow and see where we get and I think with Jim Lucy and the project is the board has to make a decision, or we'd like them to make a decision at the next board meeting, a very basic one. Do you want to go in the direction of Honeywell? That's our starting point. And if the board decides to go with Honeywell, then we can start the process of, because with Esser, I have to do construction applications. It's very much more involved than just doing a grant for positions. So I think that the starting point is, are we going to contract with Honeywell? And we can talk to them and see if they can just give ballpark, but we're not going to have estimates on how much units, air handling units are going to be by the next board meeting. I think we just have to take a step back and figure out who we're going to use first and then move forward.
Maybe that was not for, I apologize for asking ahead for the next meeting, but that is kind of where I thought we were eventually going with trying to get some numbers, saying we have this number that was kind of what needed to be done, but what would come out of that would be potentially funded by Esser if we're trying to get a handle on what Plan B would be and then spread it out over, so maybe not very next week, but in the next series of meetings, head towards that number.
So we'll know, we'd know the items, we just don't know the cost. And even if we choose all the items, depending on what they come in at, depending on how much we have left for Esser.
Right, and for a project that size, it's like what these guys did was more of like a conditions assessment and gave us kind of a priority and like a life expectancy of these units. When we start working with Honeywell, they have to drill down and get all of the specifics, and that's going to take a while.
And we'll be in November. I didn't mean to be like, it will be in November, but we'll be in November. So how are we making these decisions? We've got budget, we've got the end of the year, we've got warrants that have to be done, and we're almost, by the time we can even talk about any kind of cost, it's November.
Which is a great point. I mean, that's what's frustrating about this, but I think we're at a point now where we as a group need to decide, given where we're at tonight, whether we as a group want to stick with the plan we submitted or we want to amend the plan we submitted, because Lavalley needs to know that so they can make any changes to it, if need be, before they start evaluating it to make their priority list. Am I correct in that? So I think that would be the best use of the rest of this meeting's time, whatever that amount is.
It's not a secret where I stand, so I don't need to say anything more.
I don't think it would be fair to anybody to make a decision tonight. So I mean, I think that, but I do think we need to make a decision. So I would say maybe that's something we discuss at the next board meeting, and make sure we do have kind of all of our ducks in a row as far as whether we continue with Plan A. And then beyond that, Plan B, yeah, we need as specific numbers as possible, like Derek said. I mean, yeah. And so whatever timeline we can get that fast tracked as possible, I think is what we're gonna have to do. And I mean, we're in October already. I mean, I would say we're looking at probably as quickly as possible would be a month to have those numbers finalized. I think we also talked about warrant articles, and if we were to put together a capital improvement account, what we think is appropriate for that, as well as what we would think would be appropriate for annual spend. I mean, we have budget meetings coming up. I hope that we would get a good view into what the potential annual cost would be. And then we need to make a decision. If Plan A doesn't pass, do we need to bond out for 20 years and do all the capital improvements? Or do we do a capital improvement account that we take in the unreserved fund? Or do we do it annually?
Just to be clear, John, were you saying you weren't ready to make a decision about whether to stick with Plan A as we proposed it, or talking more detail about Plan B?
Yeah, I mean, any decisions tonight I'm not comfortable making, just because
Okay.
I don't think there was, I did not come into this meeting thinking there was a decision that needed to be made.
So from your perspective, Jay and Eric, if there was a change to what we had previously decided, what is the latest we could tell you that?
I don't know the exact date. I know the state is currently evaluating applications, and we want to give them as much time to evaluate the Derry application and make sure we rank as high as we can. If we're going to change courses, I want to make sure they understand that, and it's not a hindrance to them, that they might look differently on this project. So I want to try to get them as much information as soon as we can if we decide to cut square footage or do something different with our plan that we're currently on.
So obviously there's a lot of potential information, but is there any very specific information people need before next Tuesday in order to, because it sounds like next Tuesday we would need to make any final decisions if we're going to change the current course we're on, at least in terms of the building aid application, not in terms of the Plan B. That needs to be an ongoing discussion. Is there anything specific people need before next Tuesday so that the administration knows that?
I think it'd be an opportunity to talk to the public and receive feedback from them, other than just this meeting.
Well, and how do we make a decision in a week when we won't be able to have all the numbers that we need to be able to make that decision? Like, I feel like we keep chasing the chicken and the egg.
And I think that's why the priority right now has to be just maintenance. So Plan B, we need to figure out how we're going to fix the buildings. And if over the next few months, when we get more numbers and understanding of building aid and everything else, if we decide to go with a different plan, then we can let the state know at that point. But I think right now we don't have much information. We just need to figure out, what do we think the budget would be that the town would support, or a bond that they would support to start maintenance repairs in the district. I think that's what our discussions are over the next month and a half, And then once all the other information comes in, then we can come back and talk about A if we have to.
So I'm sorry, I just don't understand this process then. So you can put in an application for building aid and then in 2 months change it because you've changed your mind? I'm so confused by this process now.
No, not at all. So
Okay.
we want to make sure whatever we said were the deficiencies, we're still meeting. So for instance, one of the pieces, I'm just going to, again, we're talking about deep a lot. One of the pieces is deep. Deep, we all know, is locally funded. It's not state funded. If we want to cut that out of the project, that's going to change the plan, change the design, but it's still going to meet all the deficiencies we talked about at South Range and at Derry Village by building a new school. That would lower the overall project cost. It would change the plan slightly, but we just obviously want to be upfront with the state that we're not doing certain pieces. So that's just an example of one piece. Fields, for instance, we do have a couple fields in there. The state does pay for fields with a new school, so we have the fields in there, but again, those are added pieces that could be cut out of the overall project that would affect your number and would affect the state's number too if we cut a field out. Again, I'm just throwing out a bunch of pieces. If we stay course where we're at just to see how we rank, and you know, that's a little different. So I'm not saying we say, all right, let's switch schools, let's look at Hood and West Runningbrook now. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we're still trying to solve the deficiencies of the two projects or the two schools we put forward into doing something.
So I guess I was confused by what you said, because like if we're going to look at these things and decide, how do we do that when they're talking to the state?
Well, that's what I was just mentioning is we keep A is going forward. Just go forward. We have to focus now on B because A is done. So B is what we need to focus on so that we can get that second warrant ready to go.
So the only caveat with that is that the Plan A and Plan B that was presented tonight by the administration included lopping off deep and moving to a 5th and 6th middle school versus a 7th and 8th middle school. That was not our plan that we voted on prior.
Right.
So there is an effect, that is a change, right? And I gotta imagine it's a substantial change at some point.
And I apologize for that. I think I was saying, do people want to stick with the Plan A we voted on last spring, not the new one presented tonight?
The philosophical, I don't know, whatever you're going to call it, the 5, 6, and 7, 8, I think you could still change that, and the Plan A would fix the deficiencies still. So I think that's kind of a side discussion at some point, but I don't want that to muddy the waters. The administration, we asked them to give input, so they gave input. Some of us don't like it, but at some point we have to talk about it. But I think to get things moving, we need to do B right away. And let's drill down the dollars, find out what people think are comfortable numbers, and next time we have a facilities meeting, everybody spit out their numbers and give us your priority. Is it just the next 2 years we're going to do roofs? That's it. And then after that, we'll deal with electrical because we're going to focus on Esser for HVAC. So let's be ready to go. We'll just go around the table next facility meeting and say, okay, what's your numbers? Do you want to bond or do annual spend? Do you want to do capital improvement? What are your focus for the repairs? And just come together get some ideas, and then we can come and make a list, make a dollar amount, and then we can start to refine that, ask them to get bids on the stuff, and then move forward.
So from the perspective of Lavalley, presuming we went forward with option A as it was voted on last spring, and we're working now on a Plan B, if we were to make any changes to our Plan A, the one that you have right now, however small, what is the kind of a drop dead deadline, if there is that, for us to do that?
Unfortunately, I don't have that. It's
okay.
I just want to give them as much time as they can to
Okay,
react.
fair enough. Okay, I know I'm asking for a hard number. John?
I mean, I'm just going to ask the question, like when, so we probably need to set a date of when we're going to all come together as well.
So, yeah, Austin, we need a date for another facilities workshop, and we'll have to move it around both the school board and the budget meetings, which start not next week, but the following Monday.
soon, sorry, how soon, if we're going to look at dates, how soon, we have a school board meeting next Tuesday, the 11th, and we are doing the budget, Monday, October 17th, right? We're presenting the budget, and then the following Tuesday, we have a school board meeting. We've got to remember that we need to hold Thursday the 13th because that's going to be the legislative, I think it starts at 7 o'clock. The following Thursday is October 20th. Is that too far out for people?
Unfortunately, the 13th isn't available because that's the legislative committee meeting. So the
That's what I
20th
said. I
would
said
be
we
the next
couldn't do the
Thursday.
13th because of the legislative. So, and I guess it could be a Wednesday. It could be, but are we looking to meet next week? Are we looking to meet the week after? Does anybody have an opinion on that?
Yeah, my opinion would be the 20th because that gives us the ability to hold the meeting on a Thursday, and that following Tuesday would be the 25th. So any decisions that we were to make or any public input that we wanted to get based off of the workshop would give people 4 days.
Thursday the 20th, 6:30 p.m., West Runningbrook. We are going to have public input.
I think if we're going to discuss it at the next school board meeting, we can just have it as a workshop and then discuss at the next school board meeting.
All right.
Keep it as a workshop.
Is everybody good for the 20th?
So are we asking to have costs at that meeting on the 20th?
I think the idea is, we'd have some more details and costs so we could have a thorough discussion and then present it to the public during the meeting on the 25th.
But are we going to have costs available? We need cost estimates. That's what I was saying before. We need cost estimates.
Is that a realistic ask before we plan that? Having some costs available, some real costs? Because if that's not a realistic ask, that may not be the
We've got a
best
lot of
case.
costs right here that we have plenty to chew on.
And
so I'd say, say we came up with, okay, my priority of the roofs is like 8 million. Okay. Are we comfortable with a bond that's 12 million? And then we'll figure out the remaining 4 over the remaining months before the warrant goes out, because we want to put a list of things on that warrant that we're going to do. But that'll give us time to get some more costs in line, electrical, envelope, whatever else it is. Hopefully Esser covers all of our HVAC forever. But I think if we start with a number that's comfortable for people, or an annual spend dollar, whatever it is, whatever your priority is, and we pick some roofs and some either estimates or replacements or recovers, then that gives us a good chunk of change to work with.
Absolutely.
That obviously is high priority.
Yeah,
so
that's where I was going with this. I just didn't, when Erica said, asking them for, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't expect envelope costs, we didn't expect electrical costs, we didn't expect.
I think we'll have, pretty darn exact costs right here, and then we can have some other costs that are going to come in later, but really get started on what's our max dollar amount we're going to do.
Well, just because, we have costs for roofs. We haven't had this exact number, but we've kind of had that number all along. So we're not worried about the other costs. Like Jane said, Honeywell may be able to have information about HVAC, but not right away. I guess I don't understand how we move forward without having more information than the cost of roofs. For me, I guess I don't know how I move forward with that.
Could you pick a number that you think a bond would pass?
Right now?
Yeah.
No.
So you couldn't, if we had to come to the town with $12 million worth of maintenance.
If
that
I
work?
know what I'm doing, see,
Okay.
this is the problem. I don't know what roofs I can talk about because I have that information. But if I'm going to say we need a bond for $10 million, in that bond are 45 million or 4 million worth of pens, and we really need those specific pens. Yes, I can argue that, but I can't argue what I don't know. And that, I guess that's my problem. Like, how do we move forward besides having the numbers for the roofs? And if somebody knows how to do that, I'm willing to go with it, but.
And the other thing that I think we have to consider, and when this group met with Jim Lucy, we can go forward, we're going to go forward with getting numbers if that's a desire of the board to continue to work with Honeywell. We also still have the question of, are we looking at doing the HVAC for all 7 buildings? So that's the other piece of it. And I think you have to have part of it before you do the whole thing. Are we going to have Honeywell just get pricing for the 5 schools and not Derry Village and South Range? I know Esser's, even though it's federal funds, I have to stay in compliance. I'm not sure that I can replace and put all new air handling units and all brand new HVAC for a building that's possibly going to be torn down like Derry Village. So I think that we have to look at that piece too. And if you don't want to use Esser funds for Derry Village and South Range because you're not at that point, but we want to still continue with Honeywell, then we're good. But I think that when we left the meeting, I think that this leadership team would like to move forward with Honeywell. We would have brought him tonight for the meeting, but knowing that we had Lavalley Brensinger and there seemed to be a packed agenda, it just seemed like it would have been a lot, and that's why we felt bringing him on the board meeting so that the board could move forward in a direction. But after speaking with them, the length of time that it's taking to acquire product to do those replacements, some of those projects would need to be done in the summertime. So I think that you're just going to have to make a decision too on when we're using Honeywell. Am I looking at 5 buildings or am I looking at 7? And that's just another
I think that's a
component.
valid question. I guess the follow-up question I would ask to that is, would Esser even cover all of the 7 buildings even if we wanted them to? Because we only have so much access to Esser funds.
Do you mean the dollar amount of how
Yeah,
many?
the dollar amount.
Sure. So once if we end up working with Honeywell is going to come back and say, this will be the cost for the things that you've brought forward. If it's way out of the scope, then you're going to have to pare back and you're going to have to pick certain things off the items that you're not going to go with. I think that we've agreed as a leadership team, and Austin or Jeremy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Joe, but I think we want to take full advantage of the HVAC or the Esser funds and get as many projects done as possible. And those that we can't afford to are just going to have to wait and be put in as part of a capital improvement project.
Oh, I was less saying the paring back. I was just saying that it didn't seem likely that our Esser funds would cover all of the HVAC repairs. So that, it's not that I personally would want to pick or choose HVAC projects, but the likelihood that the remaining Esser funds we have would cover every single HVAC repair seemed to me to be very low.
You mean because we wouldn't have enough money?
Because we wouldn't have enough Esser funds to cover all of them. So you could, if we have a number and we know what the number is that's covered, that's available through Esser, we would just focus those on certain schools if that was the choice, and then talk about how we fund the rest as part of the bigger Plan B. I'm just saying that would be useful to know, like the whole number and then what we have available. I wasn't having any discussion about paring back. It was just the realities of what's available and where it would come from a practical level.
Sure, and that we won't know until we decide to go down that road of Esser. Just as a last thing, I looked up the school building aid to get back to the renovation. It is on page 23 of their adopted rules and regulations. If the construction cost of a renovation project exceeds 60% of the cost of new construction, the following criteria needs to be met. There's only 2, so I'll be quick. The school district shall provide documentation that new construction was considered in lieu of renovation and explain why the renovation alternative was chosen. So you can kind of look at that as a waiver. And number 2, the scope of the renovation project shall provide that all building systems shall be upgraded to the most current codes and standards, and that the building shall be fully accessible to individuals with disabilities. So that goes back to what Eric and Jay are saying, that once you start messing with one section of the building, everything's going to have to come up to code. So that's just, keep that in mind. If you do the renovation, can be done. You just may have to meet that criteria of why the new build was not the first option.
So if, in looking at the time and recognizing there's a whole lot on the table, if there are specific things people need before that October 20th meeting the next facilities meeting. If, Austin, is it okay to email you? Could you send your emails to Austin just so he can collate them and know who, make sure that those questions or concerns, or even just to make the concerns known, just so we can have those ready for the next discussion? It sounds like we can definitely discuss roofs. Maybe if people can think of some ideas about an amount they'd be comfortable with, either within the budget or as a bond, which would lead into our series of budget meetings, and then we will keep the discussion going as we get more numbers. So it's been almost 3 hours tonight, and people have put in a lot of thought, and we've had, thank you guys.
I was just going to say, feel free to CC Kathleen when you
yes,
email me.
Yes, please email Austin and CC Kathleen so we can keep track of those and make sure that everyone at least has their questions in, even if they can't get answered.
This will just take 60 seconds. I just have a request.
Yeah, sure.
Elizabeth, you did come to the microphone and you did say one thing that you supported was what Erica said about going over default. It would be very helpful. Trust me, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but I believe we can. We know what you're looking not to happen. If you guys could give us some thoughts about what you would support, like you just said, you would support potentially going over a default budget. Unless I heard you wrong, I thought that's what you were saying, so that we could do some things with the school. But giving us some thoughts about, okay, we don't want you to shut down South Range. We agree with Brenda. We don't want to do it. We want to keep all these. How do we go about doing it? How do we afford it? What are you willing to vote for? That would be extremely helpful.
Elizabeth Lavoisi, Trent Road. So, yes, the parents of SAU 10 want to support their children in every single way they can. When it's presented in such a way where, again, my big gripe was that this afternoon on SAU 10, I know you explained how you've had some, administration difficulties within the office, but the agenda posted, there was no mention of a public comment being offered. So when it's last minute and you have a ton of very passionate South Range parents who would have found a babysitter, they would have given kids early, gotten them to bed, they would have been here tonight in lieu of a 2.5 or 3 hour window.
And I'll take the fall for that. We had 2 facilities meetings that are supposed to be for us as a workshop to gather information. We hoped people would come to listen so that then when there was a follow-up at the school board meeting, which we've had numerous times, people would then come and share their thoughts. They didn't, even when there was public comment at the school board meeting. So given that we had 2 facilities meetings and this was a third, and we were going to be discussing it again, I figured if people came, it would be good to allow them to speak. We will revert to the normal workshop model where we just workshop and get a lot done, and then at our next school board meeting we will have a chance for public comment around that. But I like public comment. I love public feedback. It's why I provide information online. It's why I answer questions via email. So I was trying to solicit people to get feedback because we've had a real lack of feedback.
And if I could just pre-emphasize, I'm sorry.
Yes.
If they all showed up, one of you could come to the microphone, say the one thing that you don't want to happen. That's all well and good. Give us some thoughts about what you would support. What would you like to see done? Give us some. That's always very helpful and more helpful. We know if you pack this room, we understand that. It's happened before, right? But we know what you don't want. What do you want? What would you be willing to support? What would you look at the school board and say, yeah, I would vote for that. I would vote to go over to the default budget if it meant we could save our building and do this and do that. We need to know those kind of things. That would be very helpful.
I agree. As always, I campaigned on
I
public
just-
discourse.
I just wanted to say something that you've got an advantage that we're hamstrung with the board is that we can't collaborate, and sometimes we're criticized for that. People say that, why didn't you come in with more of a plan? We can't collaborate outside of public because it would constitute a meeting and it has to be held in public. So, but you can. You and everybody else that is interested can do that. And I think, as Austin said, instead of, slinging things here and there, if you could be a more succinct and organized and come with, this is what we would support, even with a spokesman or something like that, because you can come meet with anybody you want and come up with Plan Z. We can't do that. So I'd run with that.
Well, we appreciate you coming tonight.
Thank you. For everyone at home watching tonight, I guess this is essentially, Derry, you need to rally together. They need your input. You need to hear it. Austin has asked for it. Erica has asked for it. Everyone needs to show up to these meetings. Make your voice heard, please, because they want positive direction from the community, and nobody wants to show up. So there was 4 parents that showed up tonight. I hope there will be a better turnout next Tuesday, the following Tuesday after the facilities meeting. And if I
To be clear, there is a school board meeting on the 12th.
Thank you. My calendar's all over the place too. I have it all on my
11th.
phone.
The 11th. My apologies. I'm misdirecting people. Tuesday, the 11th. There is a school board meeting.
One more quick thing, and then I will let everyone go for the evening. In regards to the state delegation and essentially forcing their hand to, use government to come in with a fix, it's one thing to appeal to the state delegation. It's another to consistently criticize them for the choices they make up in Concord and then expect them to show up and just fawn over what we need. Now, I'm not saying that's not the responsibility. For the benefit of everyone here, it's okay. Public discourse is what we need. And if you're upset with what the town has to say, funneled through me, it's okay. But,
Libby,
you can't be so critical of XYZ and then expect such a warm reception.
I think this is a discussion for another time. We're focused here on facilities. That's why I had stopped that conversation, because it wasn't really part of facilities. And I would say the same thing now. This isn't part of facilities. I think, does anyone else have any other business under the facilities workshop?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.